Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Modern Medusa podcast. This is episode 6. I am your host, Dominique DeFalco of DeFalco Reptiles. I once again want to give a huge thank you to everyone who has been so incredibly supportive of the podcast and what we're doing. It's been so much fun. I can't believe that we're already 6 episodes in. So thank you. That's just the biggest thing I can say. And then a huge thank you to Joe Phelan with Port City Pet, of course, for being so helpful with putting this together. So today's guest is someone really exciting. She is well known for the names she and her husband have made for themselves in the last year. So we're going to introduce Ashley Haude of Focus Cube Habitats and Method Noir Exotics. Hi, Ashley.
Hi, everyone. I'm here.
Hi, Ashley. Thanks so much for joining tonight.
Happy to be here. I'm super excited. We've been trying to do this for a couple days now, or probably over a week now, and very excited to finally be here. It's a really special time.
Yeah. So the scheduling has been absolutely insane because I know, and a lot of people who are listening might know, that you are from Texas. And so you've been dealing with a bit of our northern weather down there recently. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's been pretty crazy. So my mother's from the north. She's grew up in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and lives in Delaware. So she's kind of used to it, but we were touching base the whole time. So we're located in Texas, and a lot of people in the reptile community now know that Texas was hit with an absolutely, unprecedented, that word's been used a lot in the last year or so with COVID and everything, but literally unprecedented weather event. And the sad thing about Texas is that, okay, yeah, it was cold, which is one thing that's out of the norm. It was, we measured 5 degrees on the side of our house with a temperature gun as we were trying to unfreeze pipes.
Wow.
And it's not just that it was cold and snowy, but the problem is that, the great state of Texas, we have a power grid that spans the great state of Texas.
Yeah, and that's a big state.
It totally failed, like hardcore. So and personally, my husband and I, we were not prepared. And it's one of the things that keeps getting iterated through the reptile communities is that everybody was not prepared. And then people in the north, they say, well, why weren't you prepared? You knew that it was going to get cold, you knew, et cetera, et cetera. And I understand their point of view, right?
Mm-hmm.
But something like this was not something that we could be prepared for because, hurricanes here is something that we're sort of prepared for, right? Our houses are made for it. Our infrastructure is sort of made for it. I mean, we have hurricane evacuation routes.
Mm-hmm.
But for something like this, most of us did not expect the total power grid to fail us. And
there's no reason you should have.
Well, yeah, so I like to be on both sides. So some people are like, well, you should have had a generator. You should have had this. You should have had that. So, devil's advocate, when hurricanes come through and you don't have a generator, it's still warm. So for a reptile keeper, that's not necessarily, it's uncomfortable for the humans, but for the animals that we keep, it's not really something that's an issue.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have power for weeks, it's very uncomfortable and totally humid here in Houston, but it's not like a life or death for our reptiles. Now, for cold, as we just found out, many people, is that when it drops, your house is without power for multiple days. And even if you do have a generator, the roads were impassable. We don't have the infrastructure. I had to take my mother to the airport this morning, before 4 a.m. to get on a flight.
Mm-hmm.
And we were driving through some rain, now that the weather's passed, we were driving through some rain and we went over a very long overpass and it was full of rocks and the rocks were coming up and hitting the vehicle. And we were just kind of I guess, ironically joking about it, is Texas didn't put down salt or, the typical, I guess, whatever a northern state would put down. They put down rocks. Wow. And the rocks are still there.
Yeah.
So it's not that, even if you did have a generator, you weren't necessarily able to go to a gas station. We tried to go to a gas station
Mhm.
we siphoned gas out of our jet ski that we haven't used in a year to try to, it's a whole big story, but like to power the truck that ended up powering a reptile radiant like heat panel to uh, thaw our pipes to be able to boil water for our animals. So it's
Holy
like,
shit.
yeah, you want to be, you say, like, it's easy for people to say, the Texas wasn't prepared. No, we weren't. I'll be honest and say that we weren't. I was not expecting to be without power for days.
Mhm.
And I wasn't expecting to, get on to the point that where we had to, be low on gas, that we had to siphon it out of other vehicles on our property just to power. Fortunately, my husband's truck, we had it has a built-in like AC plug.
Mhm.
So we were able to plug in a reptile radiant heat panel. And I posted pictures, on some of my social media
Mhm.
that that's what literally saved us. Like, we put that up against our pipes. We'd already had a leaking roof.
Mhm.
And so we were trying to get water to flow through the house and to be able to boil it for the animals. And that's really what got it going. So once we got that, probably about, I don't know, I'd say 14 to 18 hours in, we got the pipes unfrozen and we were able to run water. We had fortunately had gas and a lighter, so we'd light our stove and our gas fireplace,
Mhm.
and we gathered all the animals that couldn't have that had huge enclosures. So, as many people may know, I have a lot of monitors and like bearded
Yeah.
dragons and stuff, and their enclosures were just too large to heat with the boiled water that we put in, like bottles, like glass bottles, anything like, milk jugs, anything that we had in the recycling bin, we went and raided it.
Mhm.
So we were boiling the water on the stove, we transfer it into these empty bottles, and then we place them in enclosures near the animals. Like, it wasn't like boiling hot water, but it was able to raise the enclosures. I think our lowest room got to 54.
Wow.
Um, and that's not nearly as cold as some people. So our
Mhm.
house was fairly well insulated. Like I said, we temperatured our um, outside wall over here at 5 degrees. So
Mhm.
amazingly, it only dropped into the 50s. But I mean, at some point, I was pouring buckets of boiling water into, or I guess buckets. Like, I was pouring boiling water into buckets and trying to put them in the center of rooms so that like the ambient would raise.
Mhm. That's so smart. Is that something that like you saw to do or someone told you to do? Because I guess I've been fortunate to never be in a situation like that, but I feel like you have to be thinking on your feet so quickly.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I got from my parents was, trying to be able to make a bad situation into something that you can work with. So
Mhm.
obviously, it's a really bad situation. So like the power goes out, you didn't expect it. It was, I know I kind of got ahead of myself. This is where I go about rambling. Um,
I love it.
5 a.m., probably 4 or 5 a.m. What was it, the 15th? So it was right after Valentine's Day. It was that Monday. The power goes out. And we have a fan that runs for like kind of, I guess, white noise.
Mhm.
And it went out. And as soon as it went out, because I knew that we were supposed to have a storm, I looked up at the fan as it was slowing down. I said, oh shit. I'm like, we got to figure this out, because if the power just went out, who knows when it's going to go back on. Because
Mhm.
like my family was kind of joking about it. And they're like, what are you going to do if the power goes out? You guys going to be snuggling up to lizards because you're going to stay warm? And I'm like, I don't care about us. I don't care about the dogs.
Yeah.
We're warm blooded. Like,
Mhm.
that's not the I'm seriously not worried about that. We'll stay warm. But I'm like, I have lots of animals that cannot generate their own heat. And I'm like, we were all kind of like joking and like poking elbows at each other. And it was like, yeah, we're going to put crested geckos in our pockets and, we're going to
Mhm.
keep them warm. And then reality set in and the power did go out. And it was basically all hands on deck. So I woke my husband up. I said, hey, the power's out. We got to figure it out now, because it's probably not going to come back on. And
Mhm.
thank goodness, we were able to get the fire lit. So that was another whole ordeal, because
Yeah,
this
that's very lucky.
it's sort of old. It's not super old, but it's sort of old in the way that the fireplace is set up, I sound like Kevin Hart, the way my bank account's set up. The way that the fireplace is set up, it doesn't light like super, I guess, straightforward. So we had to figure out, and of course, we didn't have a long nose lighter. So we're
of course not
in there. And thank God, like I know a lot of people ran out of natural gas here in Texas. So that's another thing. It's like people were like, well, use, your gas fireplace. Well, one, a lot of homes are set up just electric because we don't have extreme colds here. And the second part is that, yes, if you were thankful enough to have a natural gas fireplace, there was just shortage of it. And thank God ours was fine. That was one of the saving graces of this whole thing, is that we were able to get the fireplace lit after some definite tense moments of, cussing and yelling and like arguing with each other why we couldn't get it lit, because it was just the stupid button that didn't work. But that's another. So we got it lit without blowing the house up. And I started gathering. I had so we go and do reptile shows. That's one of the things my husband and I do with Method Noir and Focus Cubed. And I had a bunch of big Craftsman tubs full of Biodude dirt. And that stuff's heavy. Like it's super heavy. It was upstairs. I went and I started throwing bags of dirt out. Like literally, I'm in gorilla mode. So I'm throwing these bags of dirt out and trying to get them these tubs free so I could throw my monitors in there, because I have two of my monitors, Asian water monitors, in large enclosures in our sunroom. And the positive thing about the sunroom is it's a sunroom, so it tends to get a lot of heat just from the sun. Well, with it being so cold, it also it's like an addition to the house, so it's not super insulated. So it was dropping, I think by the time I got the monitors out, within a couple of hours of the power going out, it was already dropping to 45 degrees in there.
Oh my God.
Their enclosures, fortunately, were more insulated, but like the actual sunroom is 45 degrees. So I'm just like, oh my God, okay. Like, fortunately, water monitors are hardy, but I don't want to test it, right?
Yeah, but how hardy,
Yeah, right. And I'm like, it's not fair to the animal. So I'm literally busting ass. I am just trying to get them. I have the tubs. I clean them out just so they don't have like a ton of like spider webs in them, basically, because they're in storage. And one of the things is my female Jax. She she's carrying a clutch of eggs. They're infertile because she hasn't been with a male, but she's been developing eggs. And I'm looking at her and I see her there, and she's under her basking light, just laying there like, Mom, where's my heat? She's standing there, and I open the door and she's looking at me like she puts her tongue out and she's looking, and I'm like, hey baby, come on, we got to get out of here. So I grab her and she's like scrabbling, but she's cold, so she's not like super fast. So I get her, and fortunately they're used to going in tubs for like shows and then going to the vet and stuff.
Yeah, because she's the one that you bring to a lot of the shows, right?
Well, she's my female. She's actually my first water monitor, so I have a lot of time with her. I don't bring her to shows. That's
you bring Dex and Jax. Okay, yeah, my mistake.
Yeah, that's the names. We have a different, not easy naming system. Whenever we're like yelling at them, we're like, Jax, Dex. Not that it matters. They're lizards, but it's still funny. But yes, Jax, she's my first water monitor, and she's probably about 3, almost 4 years old now, and she's been cycling, so she was developing eggs, and I was like, all right, come on, baby, I know you're just trying to bask, but there's no heat. So I put her in the tub, and I put her in front of the fireplace, and I put a temperature gauge in there. We have a lot of gobies, which are Bluetooth.
Oh yeah, they're the best.
Super awesome.
That's so good that you had them.
Yeah. So we had the temperature gauges, and I put them on the edge near the fire, just to make sure she wasn't getting too hot. But I mean, it wasn't super powerful, so that really wasn't a worry. But I wanted to make sure that she wasn't like, getting nuked in there. So I put her in the tub. Okay, first one done. Now, Ember, she's in another enclosure, and she's super easy. She's actually my blind water monitor. Super, super sweet. And she's just like kind of like laying up there, and she's got like a triple decker cage or enclosure, sorry. And she's she's hanging out there, and she's like, I'm kind of cold. So I just go and I scoop her up in there, and she's just kind of looking around like, where are we going? So I put her in a tub. I stacked them on top of each other. Fortunately, because the rest of the animals were in the house, the temperatures were kind of stable at this point. They were like around, like, it was dropping. So we keep our temperature set at in the winter 74, which is not too hard because obviously it doesn't get that cold here. So at this point, it's probably dropping to about 65 in the regular house, which is really not too bad.
Right.
Now, it's not great, but it's not too bad.
It's chilly, but it's livable.
Yeah. So all the bearded dragons, the boa constrictor, the carpet python, the green tree, the leopard gecko, the frog, all the other animals really were pretty stable. So that's when I started boiling all the water. And then we have some friends in the neighborhood, and they were texting us, and they're like, hey, do you have water? We're like, yeah, we have water. And they're like, man, we don't have any water. We're like, uh-oh. Like, it's the freeze has been setting in for long enough now that the pipes are starting to freeze. And this isn't something that we're super used to. So we're like, okay, now what? Do we run the water and just try to keep it moving? So we tried to put it on full blast in all the sinks, and it just kept getting, slower and slower and slower. And then as the day started to warm, the sun kind of like started getting on, not sun, but like, I guess, light, started getting on everything, and it kind of like stabilized. So we just kept boiling water. And for most of the morning, I guess, and probably till like from 5 a.m. till 11 a.m., I was boiling water, putting them in enclosures, and getting that radiant heat in there, and it stabilized them all around like 70 to 75 to 80, depending on the enclosure size. So that was like a major freak out. So we have, I try not to count, around 50 animals, reptiles and amphibians outside of the dogs. And they all, basically stabilized, whether they were in tubs in front of the fire or in their enclosures themselves. So like at 11 a.m., we went outside and we tried to we did a little photo shoot here and tried to, I guess make the best of it, because we're Texans. We don't see snow.
Yeah, it was interesting. I, was seeing on Facebook a lot. Obviously, this is a horrible situation, but to see some of my friends' kids experience snow for the first time was like so cute. And I think at that point too, I don't want to speak for you, but it still felt like this will pass kind of situation.
Exactly. No, that's actually a really good way to put it, because we had the panic of the morning, and we're like, okay, this was the very coldest part of the day. It started to get warm outside, or not warm, but it's starting to get light outside, and the world starts to continue moving on. All of our neighbors were outside of, like you said, their kids. And it was kind of like a heartwarming thing. You could see all the neighbors, coming out, and they were making snowmen. And everything was kind of like in the stasis of, okay, we're making it through this weird situation. We're Texans, we can do this, right? Okay. So as the day went on, once the animals were stable, the thing that was freaking us out the most is that we couldn't get any work done. My husband and I, with the enclosures with Focus Cubed, we work like 12 to 14-hour days. So,
and this is your full-time job now.
Yes, this is a full-time job now. Like I can talk about that later, but I guess me in December, yes, I actually quit my full-time job of 6 or 7 years to pursue this. And my husband the same earlier that year when the COVID shutdown happened. But yes, it is both full-time for both of us, and it is something that we take very seriously. One, because it is our sole income, or I do the reptiles are our sole income. But two, we want to make sure that we our customers and the people that also have a passion for reptiles are happy. So whenever we have a setback like this, we're kind of freaking out. So we're like, okay, this is like a weird thing. We're going to have a day of no power, and we're going to get through this. The animals are going to be fine. We're going to move on. But as the day started going on, and like we talked to our neighbors, and everybody's like, yeah, we don't have any water. And they're like, we don't have any power. So some of the houses in this neighborhood have the generators that are, attached to it, the natural gas generators.
Mm-hmm.
We had people coming like, do you need coffee? Do you need anything? We have full power. And we're like, no, we're fine. You can't just say to your neighbors that like have no idea what you do. Oh, we have like 50 reptiles that like
Yeah.
really need heat right now. So could
Mm-hmm.
we bring them over? No, that's not really something that you can do. So we're like, no, we're fine. Everything's good. Thank you very much. And just, it was kind of like a coming together of people that really don't like, we're more introverted people, so we don't like talk to our neighbors, and like our neighbors don't really talk to us. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like the thing that everybody's kind of like in a stasis, but they're fine. But like everybody came out and we're talking about like the families, like our neighbors across the street used to live in the Netherlands, and they were like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it used to be cold like this, and so it was kind of fun. So you got to like explore and talk to people and be in a situation that you weren't normally in.
Right. And that's day one.
That's day one. So as the day went on, we were still like, man, we can't get anything done. So we tried to get on the internet and we tried to do some like research stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
this is when we like really kind of got hit with it. This is probably about after we were outside, we walked the dogs and all that stuff, and they played in the snow and we
Mm-hmm.
took the video. And it was very cute. So we tried to get on and start doing research. We're trying to do like learn some stuff, watch some YouTube videos, and basically use this time for like research and development. So
Mm-hmm.
because we're always like so freaking focused,
Mm-hmm.
and we like to watch reptile
Yeah,
videos.
that's a nice little pun there. You're very focused. Almost like you're
Oh,
focus cubed.
that's a good one. You're on it.
I'm on top of it.
So yes, we're very focused here at Focus Cube. So we were trying to watch videos, but the cell service was abhorrent. Like it was just like absolute dog crap. So we were like, well, I guess we just got to sit here. And we were kind of like looking around at each other and we are like, how long is this going to last?
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of still kind of stunned from the morning. And so I was like, I don't know. And we're just looking around. I'm like, well, I mean, we could try to assemble some stuff with the batteries that we have. And so we tried to go do some work. We went into, to the shop and, tried to like clean up some stuff and like screw some stuff together. And we're like, man, we can't see. There's not enough light because we use like high powered LEDs and everything
Mm-hmm.
to make sure, it puts everything in a good relief. You can see where all the edges are and so forth. And we're like, well, this isn't working. So it was starting to drop again as the evening went on. And so we had to go do the boiling again. And we're like, well, the power's still not on. And of course, so we're one of the Entergy customers and they got hit. So like the last hurricane went to Louisiana, which
Mm-hmm.
is obviously right next to Texas. But we were without power for maybe a little less than a week because Entergy was a Louisiana based company.
Mm-hmm.
So we're like, all right, well, we'll go and it's warm and we'll go away for a couple days and try to get away from the heat.
Mm-hmm.
Animals were fine. It was like in the 80s, which is totally fine. We have a lot of Indonesian species. That's kind of where they're at.
Right.
So once again, Entergy strikes again. So we get a text message from Entergy saying we have, basically millions of customers without power. We're trying to get it back on. Turn off all essential electronics. So like when they try to turn the power back on,
right, you don't want the surge
that it kills it all. And we're like, I'm looking at my husband and I'm like, are they kidding? I mean, I get it, but I'm like, all essential, like they don't know that we have lots of animals, here in our home.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, what's essential and what's not? I'm like, I turned off, we have space heaters, we have all that stuff. And so we tried to do due diligence, like all the like heat panels and stuff wouldn't come on. I'm like, not that it would really make a difference, but it's like, okay. So we're like, all right, maybe the power is going to come back on. Nothing. So it started getting dark and we're facing another night being super cold. That was the night that was supposed to be the worst.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, long story short, we kept boiling water. We actually ran out of water because the pipes froze. We didn't know what to do. We got the truck started. We parked it in the yard. We managed to, get the heat panel going. We got heat tape on another faucet. And we made it through the night, basically taking shifts, making sure the fire was on, temping the animal tubs, making sure the rooms the animals were still in were good, refilling water bottles, and basically like what a lot of us did is used warm water to radiant warm enclosures. So the crested geckos, I actually put them all in little deli cups, and I brought them into the living room, which was the warmest. It probably was around 75. And we got all the bearded dragons at that point, the crested geckos, the monitors, and everything. The only things that were still in their enclosures at that point were the boa constrictor snake, and all the rest of them we had carpet python, not the snake. They were still in their enclosures because it was holding well enough in their 4x2x2s to stabilize. And of course, carpet pythons, they're
hardy.
They're used to Australia, which is, it does dip down. Now, it's not something that like dips down randomly like every other day, but he was fine. The boa constrictor was fine, and the bearded dragon that was on top of that third stack, she was fine as well. She was the one that I posted the photo of. She had a champagne bottle full of water that she was holding on to, and I was like, T, her name's Little T, and I was like, I feel you.
Girl after my own heart.
Exactly. And I was like, if the reptiles can do it, I can do it. So just kind of, we grit our teeth. And, there was times where I just wanted to, break down and just like, what is going on? Why is this happening? Why is it 5 degrees outside? Why is it snowing? Like, the snowing's cool, but like, okay, we're done now. That was fun. So we ended up with the second and third day. We got power for long enough. We took my husband's truck. We went and got a full tank of gas after, siphoning out of old gas out of other vehicles, to keep powering it. And at that point, when we started, the rolling blackouts started to actually be rolling and not just blackouts. That was light at the end of the tunnel. So, the temperature started coming up and animals started to go back into their enclosures, because we had one of my monitors. She broke out, the actual gravid female. She broke out of her tub and went exploring around the house, which she's done before, but we were like, hey, Jax, what's going on? She found the Biodude dirt and it was like kind of like rifling through.
And how did your dogs do with the animals all being in the living room?
Well, so we have a female Doberman that's been with us since she was a puppy. And she's a total butthead, but she was fine with the animals. She doesn't really mess with them. Now we have a rescue Doberman that we got probably, I don't know, it's almost probably a year now. We got him when he was about 5 years old. And his owner specifically said, without knowing that I had so many reptiles, he's like, he hates snakes. He kills snakes. And I was like,
what a random thing.
No, it was really weird, because that's at my previous job. He was actually one of the managers there, and he had just he had a kid, and he was having his second kid, and he's like, honestly, I don't have enough time for the dog. My wife's worried about the dog because he's not aggressive in any way, but he's just a big boy. So he's just kind of So he was like, and I said, since you already have a Doberman, so that's basically how we ended up with him. He's very sweet, but he does not like reptiles. So what we call the monitors is the snake with legs. He's like, I don't like the snake with legs. So anytime he sees them, or like they're scrabbling around, he whines and he comes to us and he's like, the snake is coming out.
So that's good that at least he's like afraid of it rather than aggressive towards it.
Yeah, he doesn't like totally attack them, but I'm sure if he was like given the chance, like he would be like, oh, this is bad. I need to protect my people. And it's not his fault. He's just a dog.
Right.
So fortunately the monitors, they're big enough. Like he's been whipped by my female water monitor, the same one that got out before. So he's like, oh, it's you. I'm not gonna mess with you. And she's like, yeah, I know how to take care of myself. So she got out and he was whining and he came up to us. He was like looking at us and I'm like, what's going on? And he goes and he looks at us and then he runs off and I'm like, he's trying to show us something. So this is like a total like Rin Tin Tin moment. He's like, look at the lizard. And he's like pointing at her and she's just like, hey guys, I'm in the dirt. Can I play with this dirt? She's like, I have no idea that I'm like so close to dying with this cold. I'm just playing in the dirt.
Yeah, she's like, I'm just getting a little tired.
Yeah, that's one of the things that kind of like warmed my heart was like the animals, we were able to keep them into enough of a state, like they're warm enough that like they just wanted to, try to go explore. Like they were like, why am I in this like 2x3 thing that's black? They don't get it. So it was exciting. We were worried about like the toilets backing up because everything was freezing. And so many people, it's really sad how many people lost animals because like anytime that we could get on the internet, like for a moment it was just scrolling through all the Texas pages. It's like, what do I do? I have no power, my bearded dragon. And I'm like, if I were those people, because a lot of people, you should have generators in Texas, you should be prepared. A lot of these people are in apartments. The apartment complexes don't have, additional power. You can't put in a generator. So it's like, what are you supposed to do? They don't have water because the pipes are frozen. It's not like you can't, as a person in an apartment complex, go and try to warm the pipes with something. That's just can't do it. So these people are stuck with body heat.
Right.
And so many people were doing,
It's a privilege too, to like, for those who could afford a generator, because while it is very easy to say get a generator, they're expensive. And one that's going to last you the 4 or 5 days, like that's going to cost you more money.
Well, yeah, especially like people were talking about. So there's just gas generators and there's inverters, and then there's ones that are like dual power, and you're going to be spending, at least $1,000 on one that can do like propane or gas. And it's like, yes, if you just have a bearded dragon and you're just, you just have a pet or a couple pets, it's really, you can't just tell that person like, hey, you should have this generator for this freak, cold that you're not expecting. And because people say you should have a generator for hurricanes, yes, okay, but it's warm. So as far as the reptiles are concerned, it's not necessary to have a generator when a hurricane comes through. If as long as obviously you're not wiped out and your house isn't totally wiped out and the generator's totally a moot point, because that's the thing with hurricanes. But a lot of these arguments, it's just it's people not really understanding the depth of what happened. And while yes, it gets colder for longer in other places in the north, and they are more prepared for stuff like this, it's not necessarily something that happens down here. The houses aren't built for it. The infrastructure is not built for it. It's like, yeah, they put down rocks. I'm not an expert on how you try to de-ice roads, but I'm like, rocks did work for the most part. There were lots of wrecks, but I mean, it's not like we have the de-icing or the salt. I don't know if they use salt anymore. I know that was an old thing, but I'm like, they just don't have that here. This is not a northern place. So like there was all these memes making fun of it, and I'm like, that's partially true, but it doesn't get 9 degrees here. So
right. I mean, it's just like, I live in Ohio. Well, I live on the border of Ohio and Kentucky. I live in Ohio. Yeah. But if we got a hurricane, we'd be screwed. Like we'd be screwed. There's nothing we can do. It's you can't really compare how people react in the north versus how you should in the south, because, like you said, I didn't consider the fact that people who have generators mostly have them for hurricanes, and that for your perspective, you don't need it because the reptiles are fine. And I think at the end of the day, with a lot of these disasters and stuff, we can take care of ourselves, but our pets are the ones that we're caring about, that like we're more concerned about. So yeah, yes. I can only imagine it was like slightly devastating to see the ridicule on social media when you were going through this.
Well, that's one of the things is like, while I enjoy social media to be able to share it with others, I do understand that it's a way for people to get on their pedestals and basically preach about stuff that not necessarily they know what they're talking about. And it's kind of like right now I'm talking about these things and I'm like, I don't necessarily know everything about what it's like to be cold in the north. I don't know. I just know what my experience was. And my experience was not good. It was genuinely difficult for us as humans with reptiles. And it's like the people that go and they ridicule us or ridicule Texas or the situation on social media. It's like, I get it that, on one hand, everybody thinks we should have been prepared. But on the other hand, it's like, man, be in our shoes. And that's always the argument, is like, be in the people's shoes who who actually experienced it. And yes, woulda, coulda, shoulda, but people weren't prepared as a whole. And I don't know if there really was a way to prepare, because on the other side, if you want to start pointing fingers, it's like, well, why wasn't energy prepared? Why wasn't all the power companies prepared? So if everybody's going to jab fingers at individuals who own reptiles or whatnot, that seem to be at fault, it's like, well, what happened to the companies that we pay our hard-earned money to? Why did they fail? And it's like, it's never a good thing to point fingers at one another, because nothing ever good comes of it. But it's like, well, that's kind of where we're at. So if social media that's just part of it. But I just urge people to reflect and be like, well, if you were having a situation, like you said, if somebody was in a hurricane that wasn't expecting it, it's like, well, how do you think that you would handle it? Basically, you have a freak out moment, lots of anxiety, and then you just have to act. And it's not necessarily that we acted correctly, like everybody, but it's like, at least with my husband and I, we tried to take care of our animals, and then we checked on everybody that we knew around here, and we did what we could. And that's really all you can do in a situation like that. And I feel for all the people that did lose animals and did have hardship, especially like, I was listening to the Reptile Gumbo podcast, and they were, it was the round table with everybody, and like Max and Corey and all those people that, they were running through the same hardships. And it's just, my heart goes out to them, because it's like, we were there having those same problems. And it was like, we didn't even really have internet access. Like, apparently, we were notified about like this big internet thing that went down. And it was like, so like I was talking to you a couple weeks ago, like my dad's moving, and he's nearly 70 years old, and he was without power for 2 extra days. And he's, not to get into the details, but he's like an older guy, and I was super worried about him. There was no way I could get to him. Our cell service was horrible. I couldn't contact him. And my mother, who lives in Delaware, was freaking out. And so it was like, not just our situation, but like our family situation, our friend's situation, and like my husband's family who lives south of here, they were without power. My sister-in-law, she has 2 broken hands with a 4-year-old. It's like, people are going through real problems that, I don't know. I'm not super vocal about all the hardships that everybody went through as us personally, but I'm like, it was definitely difficult. I felt very, very empathetic for the people that were surrounding me, that were just like in tears. And I'm like, there's no way for me to help them. I barely can get on my cell phone, and all these people online are making fun of us. And I'm like, that's part of it. I know that's how the internet works, but it's like, man, like we really need help.
Yeah. And it's hard to, hindsight's 2020 of thinking like how people could have been better, how the community could have been better, how people could have been better prepared. But I think it goes a lot deeper than just the animals, like you said. Like, I don't want to speak for you, but overall, you came out very fortunate. You're healthy, your animals are healthy, and you're reading now that there's people who died because they couldn't get oxygen, or people, like kids who passed away because they got too cold. It was bigger than the animals, and a lot of times the animal community has a tendency to really focus on ourselves and not think of the bigger picture of what was all going down there.
Yeah, I definitely, I agree that it was a more dire situation than a lot of people ever thought it would be, or even, continue to think. There's a lot of people that are very, very separate, very in different situations, that really like still kind of brush it off. But moving forward and trying to turn it into something that's positive, is that everyone who experienced it learned a lot. And I hope that moving forward, that we're the political part of the energy grid and all that stuff. I'm like, I just hope that something good comes out of it, that, the trials that everyone went through, and the people and the animals and like even the wildlife that's been lost because of it, I hope that
Yeah.
we can grow from it, and learn and try to, I guess, be ready for next time. Like the last time something like this happened was probably 20, 30 years ago. So it's not something that happens often, but it probably will happen again. So I hope that we can learn from it. As bad as it was, there's through trial is there's got to be a positive that comes from it. So I just hope that, people, my message is that people should have empathy and understand that, there's not something you can always be prepared for, but if you are part of something that's happening, try to do your best to take care of what you have. So that's what we did. We lost sleep, and we definitely went through, some stressful times, just trying to, because as you're in it, after you're out of it, you're like, oh yeah, that was fine. We were totally fine. But as you're in it, you're like, you don't know how cold it's going to get. You can't guess, you can't predict. And a lot of people, what they said is they're like, okay, so like it's this degrees now. It's like, when is the power going to come on? And they're trying to figure out, is it better to move the animals? Because then if you move the animals, then you have an added stress. If you try to drive elsewhere, how are the roads? And it's all of these, as you're in it, you don't know. Like I said, exactly like you said, hindsight's 2020. So as it happened, you're like, yes, that was the right way to do it. But as you're in it, it's like you second guess everything, and you just try to do you.
Yeah, I hope this can be a learning for the whole community. So, two more questions about this, and then we can start talking about other things. But I would love to know how you are monitoring your current animals to like make sure everyone's healthy, and then also if you know of any ways that we can assist people who did go through some hard times in Texas, how we can help them out.
So the first question is monitoring everyone. With reptiles, as many people know, especially who listen to this podcast, are very passionate and interested in their animals, that if you see lethargy, especially now that animals are starting, at least here in Texas, oddly enough, animals are starting to come out of brumation. So you're going to start seeing them feeding, having larger appetites, so really with a lot of collections, the big concern is our eyes, because they got too cold. And so basically just check for sneezing, lethargy, not eating, especially with snakes, not taking a meal. And it's just kind of all those little cues of seeing like if the animal's defecating, the color of the urates, dehydration. That's a huge thing. So people who lost water, I know it's for a couple days for like a reptile is not necessarily bad, but like being cold. And then once the power came back on, it wasn't like, oh, the world's back to normal again. So we had to, like with us, we had, a leaking roof that we had to fix, and we had to, try to get everybody back into their enclosures and take care of our family. And you can't just get back to normal. So, I'm sure a lot of the animals didn't get taken care of immediately once the power came on. So it's like, yeah, just basically check your collections for lethargy, sneezing, any kind of bubbling, like typical RI kind of stuff. And I know a lot of people are very, like I'm on Bearded Dragon group, and a lot of people are like, yeah, won't take any food, really lethargic. Like before this was all good. And so veterinary, if you don't know, like veterinary, you need to go to a vet. And the problem is that right now here in Texas, there's going to be, the long tail. So it's going to have repercussions past the event. So there's going to be vets that are either unable to care for or don't know how to care for, not exotic vets. So it's like, choose the right vet, go there, have them tested. There's going to be, there's a lot of talk of Baytril flying around, and it's not necessarily I know this isn't the greatest opinion, but it's not necessarily the greatest thing to be able to like just, oh, it's got an RI, throw some Baytril at it, because that's the reason, having gone through that with some of my animals, it's like, that's where resistance comes from. So basically be responsible, check your animals. If you see something that's not, going as you would normally see it, move on from there. And as far as the second question, how to help. There's the one of the amazing things that came out of this that's actually been in the works for a year or so, is the Herps Family Foundation. That's Sean Gray and Lori. They are down here in Texas. They're a reptile show promoter, and they put on, like, we try to do as many shows as we can with them, just because like they have some of the greatest shows. They do a lot of work.
I've heard great things.
Yeah, they're awesome. So like any support that we can give to those two, and all the vendors and all the people that go to their shows. They started a foundation, so you can find that in, I think it's the Herps Family Foundation, at gmail.com. But and I'd look on my phone, but it's going to get all wonky if it's what I'm videoing on.
We'll double check afterwards, and I'll put it in the description of the podcast.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And that's going to be, that really supports the families that are in need. And there's also I think it's the Texas Relief 101. I'm not sure.
I think it's Reptile Relief 101.
Okay. Reptile Relief 101. That was the, what we later found out was the repercussions of a big, internet argument, as far as, and something that really shouldn't have happened, but it did. And other reptile, enthusiasts in the hobby started this to try to help out, the people that were affected. So don't quote me on the names, but once we, get all done with this, if you put those in the links, those are going to be the best.
I absolutely will. Awesome. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for talking through all that, because it is, it's a very hard situation. It's not necessarily something you're going to want to talk through all the time, because it is, I don't want to say it's traumatic, but it was a very difficult situation to go through. But on a little bit of a lighter note, I would love to talk, kind of get into your history with reptiles, how you've been working with them, and how you've gotten to where you are today.
Well, I guess if people are familiar with the Herpetoculture magazine and the Herpetoculture podcast, my husband and I have been on that, and I've written a couple articles. But if you're not familiar with that, my story basically starts when I was about 7 years old. My parents were basically the original enablers that started the whole, reptile obsession. Oddly enough, they weren't reptile people. They really had no vested interest in the reptiles. They just knew that it was something that I was interested in. Like my dad, he grew up in the country. He caught snakes, and we had some land. And when I was growing up as a kid, he'd be welding and stuff, and then he'd see a snake and he'd go grab it, and he'd want me to touch it. And I was kind of freaked out. I was just a little kid. He's like, no, it's a snake. It's okay. And he'd catch it, and he wouldn't, he'd be holding it. And I didn't know what kind of snake it is. And I found out later, when he was a kid, he used to catch venomous snakes all the time. And he was just, he was a country kid. He just, loved wildlife. So fast forward, he actually became a Houston police officer working with canines. So he was very familiar with, animals that I guess had, could be potentially dangerous. It's not that dogs are, inherently aggressive, but he did work with the dogs that definitely had some attitudes, being police dogs. And so I grew up with animals that basically were, that had some personalities, and I was always interested in the reptiles. And my mom wasn't necessarily afraid of reptiles, but she would always tell me when the lizards were on the wall outside. She'd be like, Ash, come here, come catch it. So it was the little anoles. Growing up, I grew up in Houston, Texas. I haven't gone far. So I grew up here, and I used to always catch little anoles on the wall, and I was just a little kid. I loved reptiles. They were fascinating. And also, because I was an only child, I think that between the dogs and the animals that I had as a kid, I really found, I guess, solace with the animals, because I didn't have a whole lot of people interaction. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was kind of the weird kid. I'm still the weird kid, which is totally
aren't we all? I think if you're on this podcast, you're qualified as a weird kid. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah. But it's that's the best way to be. I think it's you are who you are. And that's what I always tell my husband, that reptiles are what they are. They don't try to like put on, I guess sometimes they're like, they puff up and they're trying to be big and bad, but I'm like, they're very instinctual animals, and I very much respect them for that. I love that, you know they if they want food, they're like, I want food. If they want to go somewhere, they're like, I'm going here now. And I love that, because like so many, when I was a kid, I was super made fun of because I was totally a geek, which also is fine. But as a kid, you don't know how to deal with that. So you feel like put down. And like now I'm like, I'm proud to be that way. But as a child, like you just don't know. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna go play with this toad over here because the toad's just gonna pee on me. It's not gonna do anything bad.
Yeah, it's expected. There's something expected about working with animals, at least reptiles.
Exactly. And I think that's why it draws a lot of us to that, is that they are really unique animals, but it's like kind of their behavior is more predictable. It's more expected. And it's kind of like what we want to work with. And we kind of like, I don't know, in the lizards, I kind of see myself in them as a kid. I'd watch them and how they'd hide, when somebody came around. And I was super introverted when I was a kid. And it's like, I was like, I want to be a little lizard, So anyway, I don't know if everybody had that experience.
You just really wanted to be a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle.
Exactly. I love those too. Oh my God, it was so much fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in the 90s. And so, 1994 through like 1996, my parents were like, I wanted an iguana. Actually, let me rewind. I wanted a Nile monitor. I didn't know what a Nile monitor was as a kid, but I knew I wanted it because it was big. So I would look in all the books, because that's all you had back then. There wasn't any internet. So I'd go and look in the books in the library, and I was like the kid, like looking through all the nonfiction books and all the lizards, and it was the Nile monitor and the iguana. And in the 90s, that's what really was imported / like in pet stores. And so my parents were like, man, the Nile monitor, that seems a little much, looking at it, like they're kind of like assholes, which they still are assholes, because that's just their personality. They're wild caught, like people pick them out of the wild. So they were like, well, how about we get an iguana? Like most,
which is also an asshole lizard, but lesser known. Absolutely. Yeah, it just, which cracks me up, because it's like you chose two really bad lizards.
And that's what was so funny about the 90s, and what a lot of people, I guess now, in social media, they didn't have that experience in the 90s of like, they just came into the reptile hobby when there was internet and when there was information. Back then, like, there really wasn't anything. You went to a pet store and they were like, here's an iguana for like $15. Do you want it? There was like 20 of them in the glass aquarium.
Yeah, and they're all really small and really cute.
Yeah, they're green and they got their little eyes, and they're all like kind of puffed up like little hot dogs, Yeah. That's what I saw as a kid. And I was like, oh my God, I want that. I wanted the Nile, but my parents wouldn't let me. So I was like, sweet, great iguana looks cool, right? So the best thing they could have done is they say, all right, Ash, if you want an iguana, you have to wait a year until your birthday, basically a year. And I was like, oh my God. I'm like, kids don't have that kind of attention.
Yeah, a year is a long time.
Yeah, when you're 6, 7 years old, I was like, okay. And so they thought that I would lose interest in it, but I didn't. And so I read all the reptiles magazines. I would make them go to the pet store, and I'd get all the books. And like, there's these awful books. I mean, they were horrible. Like, I go and look at them. I found a couple as my dad's been moving recently, and I was like, oh my God, somebody like printed this. Like, they spent the time and the money.
This was scientific fact? What?
Yeah, that's what's insane about it. So I look at that stuff and I'm like, oh my God, the 90s, wow. But I digress. That was a really fun time to be a part of it. But so a year went by, it was my birthday, and I wanted to go on. I read all the books, and they were like, all right. I was incessant, like a lot of us, I'm sure. So I was like, all right, iguana. And then so we went to the pet store, and of course my dad, he's always loved animals, and he's definitely not the one to be outdid. He was like, do you want 2 iguanas? Do you think your iguana needs a friend? And I was like, heck yeah, my iguana needs a friend.
Oh my God. I'm like stressing out for you. And I know how the story ends. Like,
Yeah. So we ended up, and I remember my mom was pissed off. And I reflect on it now, and she was like, those people in there were rolling their eyes at us. And I was like, oh, yeah, because we were the people that came in and were like, oh, they need a friend, like a puppy, you know? Iguanas don't need friends.
No,
They really don't. But they still sold it to us, which was also, that's kind of how that all goes down. Because one of the sad things is that like that pet was then and now still is kind of expected as a disposable pet, which it shouldn't be. They're actually very intelligent animals, as much as buttheads as they can be. So anyway, we get these iguanas home. We get an even bigger enclosure, which is, better than I think most people would have done. So my dad got an extra, large enclosure, and we put them both in there. They had a fluorescent light and like a red light. That was it. I think it was a black light. It wasn't even a red light. So it was the red warm light at night.
Yeah, I had that for my first leopard gecko because I wanted to be able to see it at night because I was an idiot.
Well, we didn't know. We were like,
I know.
Oh, cool. So we put it in there, and they chose, I don't know why, still to this day, I like sometimes have dreams about it or think about it as I'm going to bed. They chose to put slate rocks, like hundreds of little slate rocks in the bottom of this basically terrarium aquarium on the second story of our house. And I'm like, okay, it looks pretty. We've got sticks in there. We disinfected some sticks. We put them in there. We had the little lights, and they were, doing iguana stuff. And then they poop all over the place on the rocks. And whose responsibility was it to clean it? Well, it was mine, because they were my iguanas. I waited a year, and I was supposed to know all about iguanas. So they put all these rocks in there. So once again, this is kind of, I guess, like a really good, not coming of age story, but like responsibility story, is I had to take every single one of those rocks out there, carry them downstairs, go and clean them with bleach, because they taught me that I should clean it with bleach. So I think that's where like sort of my disinfecting, obsession went to. I'm really about clean stuff. So I think it started there, because they're like, you can't let the poop, you can't let it not be in there for too long. So I'd come home from school and I'd look and they poop, and I'd be like, oh my God, I gotta clean it. So I take all the rocks out of there, because I was trying to be a good kid. And I take all the rocks out of there. I clean it with bleach, and I wouldn't know how long. I didn't know what bleach was, and I was like, oh, it needs to be clean. So I had this kind of like obsessive thing that developed, and I was like this 7-year-old kid, and I'm like, but they're clean, and they're like, yeah, great, that's good. So anyway, we moved on from the rocks pretty quickly, because it was getting really hard for me as a kid to like be ferrying these rocks around. I'm like, is it really good to have these rocks? And they're like, oh no, we'll go back to the store and see what they think. So we got Repticarpet.
That I was hoping for it. I was thinking she's either going to mention Repticarpet or heat rock. She's going to get one of the two.
So we didn't get a heat rock, but one of the stories, or I guess how the story goes down, is because my iguanas didn't die immediately. All my like the people at school, they weren't necessarily my friends. I guess they were, acquaintances at school. They'd be like, their family would be like, hey, you have iguanas? And they'd be like, get their kids to tell me that they had iguanas. And then they get with my parents and be like, hey, we hear you have iguanas. We have one that's really mean, and we don't want to take care of it anymore. Will you take it? And of course, me as a kid, I'm like, yes, I want more iguanas.
That's every reptile person's like starting story. It's like, when did you get your first unwanted animal?
Yeah. So it was like, I don't know, probably a year into having my 2 iguanas, and I was enjoying them. They were actually growing and doing fine. We actually took them to the vet and got recommendations on this like iguana food that we would mix up in this huge vat. My mom and I, it was a great memory I actually have, is we put all the like greens in there and the carrots, and then they had us mix eggs into it, and we'd freeze them in bags. And so like half the freezer was full of iguana food. So it's like, that's what really is awesome to me, that my parents really supported that. Cause like,
I was going to say, it's great that they got so involved with it.
They devoted a lot of time to it. So I got this, my third iguana was a rescue iguana from the neighbor kid, and basically that one came with a hot rock and Repticarpet.
Ooh, jackpot.
Yeah.
When are we going to see
that,
some hot rocks built into the focus cubes?
oh my gosh.
You could do a retro version.
Retro, like fake hot rock.
Yeah, limited
I mean,
edition.
that was the thing. Like that's what you get. It was like it looked like, like a desert rock. And,
I always thought it looked like Pride Rock from The Lion King.
Yes. Oh,
because it always had like a slanted edge where they would just sit on top. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sadly, the animals didn't have a lot of pride in it because it burned them. But
circle of life.
Yeah, circle of life. So yeah, we got the iguana with the hot rock and the Repticarpet, and we went on our way. And then another birthday rolled around, and my dad showed up in his police car, and he had a huge male iguana in his hand. And I was like, oh my God, you got me another iguana. I had no reason to think of like why he didn't have it in a box, why it was huge, blah, blah, blah. Later, I found out that he had found this iguana. It was my birthday's in December. It was like December 5th or 6th. Mm-hmm. So a couple days before my birthday. He had found this iguana in Memorial Park in Houston. So it was pretty chilly, and some people were trying to like poke it with a stick. And so he was like, hey, my kid loves iguanas. Why is this iguana here? This shouldn't be here. It's probably somebody's pet that was let go. And so he chased after it. And he and a couple of his buddies, because obviously they're canine police officers, they're letting their dogs, take a break at the go to the bathroom at the Memorial Park and kind of like I guess have like a little bit of downtime. And so he chased after this iguana and managed to catch him after the iguana went on two legs and was like,
did the whole thing.
Did the whole alien thing, the windmill legs just going to town. So he caught this iguana and brought it home, and it was the sweetest thing. He really was. I called him Lucky. I wasn't super imaginative with my names when I was a kid.
That's okay. I once got a black goldfish that had an orange spot in its forehead, and I named it Orange Forehead. So I was also not very good at names. I still get made fun of for that one all the time.
I swear that is the best name ever.
It had an orange forehead. Like, I don't know what you want me to name it.
That's awesome. I like that. Mm-hmm. I like that. I think, you should have a throwback to something like that now.
Yeah.
I can have the hot rock and you can have orange forehead.
Yeah, I'll rename my cat.
There you go. Yeah, your name's been, something for so long, but now it's gonna be something completely outrageous.
Yeah, why not?
So yeah, that's basically the iguana story and how I came into reptiles. So that's when I was very young. My parents put a lot of effort into making sure that I was the one responsible. While it was stressful for me as a kid, not knowing how to necessarily take care of these animals, even though I was supposed to know, they knew that I was a kid. You only have so much attention span. But I learned my responsibility at a very young age, and I was very proud to basically, other than paying for food and stuff, be the one that was the sole caretaker of these animals as a kid. So I basically I cut my teeth very young with the reptiles.
Mm-hmm. And from there, was your fascination always with big lizards? Because I know right now it seems like there's three camps of reptile people. There's snake people, lizard people, and turtle people, or turtle and tortoise. I feel like you fall under the turtle category. Or excuse me, not turtle, geez, the lizard category. I was just thinking about turtles.
My mom definitely loves the turtles and tortoises. I was like a typical kid. I had a red-eared slider that was wild caught from our pond. All the things that you really shouldn't do. Mm-hmm. That's what it was when I was a kid. So I did have the red-eared slider. It was a very cool turtle. But yeah, I've always been the large lizard person. I've always been fascinated with things with legs. More recently, I've gotten into the snakes, I'd say probably within the last 5 years. And the snakes are absolutely phenomenal. They're a different type of animal to keep, as far as the the large monitors, but they have their own reward of keeping. I really do enjoy the snakes, and they're a lot. I don't know. I'm not using simple in a bad way, but they're a lot simpler to keep.
Yeah.
They're just with the lizards, like there's just so much time involved, and they're so curious and they destroy everything. It's like we have a carpet python and he loves to mow over all of his plants, and it's like that's fine. You can mow over your plants, like as long as you're not shredding your entire enclosure with the like the monitors do. I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
it's so nice. He just kind of like cruises over stuff and just like
Yeah.
lays it down.
And it poops like once a month.
Oh my god, that is the
And
greatest.
yeah, I had a bearded dragon actually last year for a grand total of a week and a half because I told the rescue I work with I would foster it because my little sister, I lived with her. She was like, I want a bearded dragon. And then I was the one doing all the work. And I was like, absolutely not. Never again. Not until I'm more secure in my life. Because it is, yeah, like you said, it's just a completely different type of animal to be working with, not just like the actual animal part, but the amount of dedication you have to put in every day to them.
Hmm. And the funny story is that I've always been a lizard person, and so I guess for like I said, I cut my teeth at a young age, having to pick up those rocks and take them downstairs and disinfect them, and then put them back for my iguanas. I got used to that effort, and so with the snakes, it was funny. Like, so my husband, whenever we first met, he knew that I was the reptile person because we had known each other since kindergarten, and I was the weird kid on the recess at recess that all the other kids were gathered around. He walked over and he's like, "This is some weird girl that's holding a peeing toad. Like, this is gross. Like, this is nasty." And we always tease each other. It's like, "Would you think like 30 years later that you'd marry that girl?" And he's like, "Hell no."
Yeah, that's so special. So so you were in the hobby, and then did you when you guys were dating or like getting serious, was it something that he was like 100% accepting of?
So Stephen is a very remarkable person in that he has a lot of patience for a lot of things. And I really do have to give that to him because whenever we first started dating, he knew that I liked reptiles. And it wasn't really, when we got together, we were living in an apartment. And once we started getting like real steady, I had a bearded dragon. So when I went to college, so I kind of got out of the reptiles as far as like whenever I was in my teen years because you always get interested in other things.
Mm-hmm.
You're just kind of growing up and going through all the trials and tribulations of being a teen and trying to figure out your place in the world. And I didn't really have a whole lot of reptiles at that point. But when I actually moved to Austin and I was going to college, um, I rescued a bearded dragon. She was being surrendered by her family because they just had a kid, and she thought that the little kid's fingers were like mealworms. And so they were
Mm-hmm.
freaking out because like she's just doing a lizard thing. They were
Yeah.
like, we just don't have time for this. Like, we can't have the lizard biting the baby's hands. So it wasn't necessarily that, they didn't want to take care of her, but when we went over there, she had never had UVB light. She was on sand. They just fed her basically crickets and worms. She didn't have any greens. So it was one of these things that she was loved, but not cared for in the proper way, which is the
Mm-hmm.
fate of so many reptiles. You being a
Especially,
rescuer.
yeah, especially those starters, like the typical best pet first reptile. You see it with leopard geckos, you see it with ball pythons and beardies all the time.
It's sad because they're hardy. They're for the most part, but it's like, yeah, they can only take so much of that quote abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Is like, I guess it's unknowing neglect is what happens.
Yeah,
It's
because
like,
these people genuinely care.
yeah, yeah,
It,
yeah,
they just don't know. And
exactly.
unfortunately, the pet stores don't help with that.
Well, that's one of my, I guess, kind of not crusades. It's a little extreme, but like kind of like why I love these podcasts and I want to be a part of the community is not necessarily in like when we go to shows is I really enjoy educating because there's so many
Mm-hmm.
people out there that don't understand that. So that's I know it's my little squirrel tangent, but like
No, I love
that's
to talk about it.
that's one of my goals in this community is not necessarily to be a part of it, but is to include people who wouldn't necessarily know and try to educate them because I think that a lot of people can benefit from keeping and being around reptiles. I think that
Mm-hmm.
they're different than mammals, and I think that you still can make a connection to them. And I know that like somebody caring for a reptile, that could really give a lot of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of one of my things. But back to my husband and I. Anyway, so I was in college. I had a bearded dragon, rescued her. I got her when she was probably a couple years old, and she ended up living to 14 years old with me. Around 14 years old,
Wow.
she ended up going blind, but she was always a good eater. She ate her salad when she learned what a salad was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so I had her, and when I met my husband, or we met him, after we had gone our separate ways through like grade school, we reunited. I had moved back from Austin after going to college, and I had two bearded dragons at that point. I've always been into the motorsports, and randomly on a motorcycle forum, back when forums were a thing, we in the classified section, somebody was like, "I'm selling a bearded dragon," and we were like, "Okay, cool." So my boyfriend at the time, we went over there and we got this bearded dragon from this guy's garage that like rode motorcycles, and he's like, "Yeah, she's yellow and she eats stuff, and I'm selling
Great.
her." Yeah. I was like, okay, cool. So she was, I still have her actually, which is really funny. Her name's Stella. She's probably about 14 or 15
Sorry,
now.
give me a second. My cat is on a cage. Eva, what the hell? I'm recording. Oh my God. I think she's so good, and then she thinks I'm not paying attention.
That's cats for you.
All right. So you're going to pick up. She said she's yellow. Sorry.
Okay, yeah. So she's yellow. Yeah, you got to keep me on point. I'll go off on any kind of thing. I was about to start talking about my cat.
At the end.
So yeah. Yellow beard, got it. Out of somebody's garage. So we're like, hey, yeah, we're here for the bearded dragon. And they're like, yep, here she is. We give them $100. We get this whole bearded dragon set up, and she's super sweet. And yeah, I still have her to this day. So when I met my husband again, we moved into an apartment, and we had two bearded dragons. And within a year, the two bearded dragons turned into still two bearded dragons. Izzy passed away, and like I said, it was into motorsports, and we were actually at a drift event. And I surprised him by saying, "Hey, can we go over to the Walmart parking lot next door and go pick up a bearded dragon?" And he's like, "Excuse me, what?"
We have
And I
one.
said, "Oh, yeah, there's a guy that was giving away bearded dragons and said that because there's little babies, they're two beards, mated, and they managed to incubate the eggs, and they didn't know what to do with the babies.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't think that she'd have that many, so they were giving away like
No one ever does.
yeah. So there's like, at the time, I think there was like 4 left, and I was like, yeah, we'll take one. They were like, we just want to give them the good homes. We, didn't expect this. Typical story.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, man, you had to go through the whole incubation thing, and I'm like, just seems odd. But anyway, I was like, sure, I'll meet you in a Walmart parking lot at a car racing event and to go get a bearded dragon. So it's a memory that pops up every once in a while. We met somebody. I drove my race car over to at the time it was not street legal. We drove across the street into the Walmart parking lot, met this person. They gave us a bearded dragon in a little critter keeper, like a cricket thing. And I have a picture of Steven just like looking at this critter keeper with this tiny little baby beard in there with the little, like, because typical bearded dragon problem is its clutch mates had eaten off its tail. Mm-hmm. So it was a nubby. And he's just looking at this thing like, why are we doing It's like, why didn't you tell me about this? And I was like, I just figured it would be a surprise.
Happy birthday.
Yeah.
It's just a gift.
So I figured that he'd be okay with it because he wasn't involved with the reptiles at that point. I basically took care of them. They kept them. They weren't stinky. They didn't get in his way. So I was like, well, this bearded dragon needs a home, and I'm like, we'll be fine keeping it. Mm-hmm. So I also still have that one. That one's name is Chuki. Still nubby and still insane. That is the most insane bearded dragon I've ever had. Loves like anything that moves. Mm-hmm. So I have both of them. And so that was, and then I ended up with 2 tegus because I wanted to get into, larger animals again, or larger lizards. And I was like, well, I don't want to get an iguana because they're kind of butt heads. Mm-hmm. and I wanted to get into something that was at the time a little bit more rare. And tegus were kind of like getting real popular at that point, and they were
Mhm.
like basically the daily dog.
So
And that's kind of how I
what
sold
year is this?
2015,
Okay.
2016.
So fairly recent.
So not too long ago. Yeah, not too long ago. This is after we've all returned. We were established um, and living in an apartment. And
Mhm.
this is after I had a huge breakup with an ex. We had a house and everything together that had the bearded dragons. And I was homeless for like a short, very, very short amount of time. I didn't want to go back and live with my parents. But I ended up doing that. And it was the best move that I could have made, but it was really stressful at the time, especially having the animals.
Mhm.
And so reuniting with Steven I guess pretty much the best thing that ever happened to me, because we started dating and we got serious, and we were able to kind of do everything on our own terms, as far as you know getting the apartment. And like, it wasn't just one of us that had it. We got it together, and
Mhm.
basically as the relationship grew, our family grew. So reptiles really weren't his thing. So I ended up with the two bearded dragons, and I had two tegus, both rescues, um, at that point. And um, really, it all started to get real serious when we finally bought a house, probably 3 or 4 years ago.
Mhm.
When we got married. We got married and we bought this house that we're currently in. And at that point, I was like, okay. So he had been working at a motorcycle dealership, and I was working at a car dealership. And we were working our way through, I guess, becoming, you know, um, what do you call it? Working through the ranks. That's not
Mhm.
really
Climbing the ladder.
yeah, those kind of like euphemisms. So we were
Yeah.
climbing the ladder at our particular dealerships. And like I said, we had always both loved motorsports.
Mhm.
So um, we moved into this house, and I said, okay, for my long-term thing, I really would like to keep and breed reptiles, and I would like to do something that's more educational. I would like to start doing more educational shows and stuff. And this is all way before COVID stuff. So, I
Mhm.
mean, like, I always have wanted to do, um, when I was a kid, my parents let me go to the educational shows. They had the Burmese python back in the 90s, Burmese python, iguanas, a leopard gecko, frogs, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And that made a huge imprint on me. And I'm very thankful that I got to be a part of that. And I always wanted to give that back to kids these days. And I always wanted to be able to do that. And I was like, I would love to start breeding reptiles, and like long game kind of thing is have like an educational kind of thing. So I'm like, well, if you're going to do education, you want to start from the beginning and like have animals that you know and understand.
Mhm.
So I started getting into the crested geckos and croc skinks now that I had separate rooms in the house, right?
Mhm.
And um, uh, I guess Steven was like, okay, I kind of get it. And, I'm not really interested, but if that's something that makes you happy, he's like, go for it. So I ended up getting lots of crested geckos, and thankfully, I got into the xanthic crested geckos, and that really is what made me think that, hey, this could be something that's like a real deal.
Yeah,
Because
your xanthics are gorgeous. They were the
yeah,
first ones I've ever seen. And you're selling most of them to Europe now, is that correct?
yes, actually, Europe is a huge market, which is really funny. Another tangent that I could go, or a little squirrel, not a tangent that I could go off onto, is when I got into the xanthic crested geckos, there were probably 3 or 4 people here in the US actually doing it.
Mhm.
And I bought two head xanthics at the time, and everybody thought that, crested geckos were their genes were polygenic, and they couldn't be predictable. And
Mhm.
so, one of the breeders here, Brian, he had gotten the original set of xanthics from UK, which is from Catherine in the UK. He bought out her project. And he was selling hets, and I didn't know if I could believe him, because everybody was like, oh, typical internet, they were saying, oh, this guy's lying, like
Mhm.
this is not how genetics work in crested geckos. And so he was selling a pair, and I said, okay, I'm going to take the jump. I'm going to take the leap, because I love Method Noir exotics, I love dark morphs, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I figured, well, if I'm going to get into this and I want to do the crested geckos, I'm going to do what I love. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what, if you're ever going to breed reptiles or keep reptiles, you need to do what you love.
Yeah. You
So I
have to
said,
go
okay,
because you have to be able to confidently keep every single baby if none of them sell. You know, you don't want to be getting something
yes,
that you're not going to be happy with having 500 of if that's how many you produce.
yes. And that's a very important note that I'm glad that a lot of people, or that you brought up, is that so many people don't expect that, oh, I'm breeding crested geckos because people buy crested geckos. But when you have 50 babies of crested geckos and nobody wants to buy them, guess what? What are you going to do with them? You got to be
Mm-hmm.
responsible. So that's a very important point. Anytime that you're going to think about, delving into breeding reptiles, is these are living things. So
Mm-hmm.
I got into the exanthics, or at the time were potential exanthics, and it turned out that I did hatch one, my first one, and I started, like, when it popped out of the egg, I started crying because I was like, I didn't know if this was going to be a viable thing.
Mm-hmm.
I had put thousands of dollars down to get these so-called, quote, hets, for the people that can't see, and everybody thought that this guy was full of crap.
Mm-hmm.
But it turned out that he wasn't. The people that did believe in them, like, no, I've hatched exanthics, and it's like, well, who do you believe? So I was like, all right, I'm gonna, karma's good. I'm gonna, believe this guy, and I'm gonna get them. And they ended up being viable, a beautiful, beautiful hatchling exanthic. Absolutely beautiful parents, and I am so thankful I got to choose from multiple, like, sets of, I guess, pairs. And the ones that I chose were because they were dark. And I was like, well, if I'm looking to do this, I want to have, dark parents. Maybe they have darker babies. And
Mm-hmm.
my basically line of exanthics has been some of the darkest babies hatched. And I'm very proud of that, because
Yeah.
it's like that, when I was developing, or I guess trying to, like, figure out what my goal or what my name was going to be, was one of the things that I fretted over for a long time. It's like one of those things where you, like, pick at your lip and you're, like, biting your nails. It's like, should I do this? Should I not?
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that I chose, and it ended up working out. And so exanthics have been a huge part of the growth of my reptile collection, and basically what my life has turned into. And yes, all of them, almost, I'd say 80% of them, have gone overseas, which is funny. Going back to why I started this, is that they actually originated from the UK. So they've been going over to Europe. It's like this whole full circle thing all over again, because
Mm-hmm.
they're like, well, we don't have exanthics here. I'm like, actually, I'm working with a line that originated in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really odd, situation, but I guess it's funny how things end up working out.
Mm-hmm. So what does your current project look like for your crested geckos? Are you
So
just working with exanthics?
I'm working with exanthic. I actually have three kind of big projects going. I have the exanthics, which I'm working on visuals and trying to put more pinstriping in, and trying, obviously, with Method Noir to go with the darkest of
Mm-hmm.
them all. So I try to pair with, pinstripes, quad stripes, super stripes, anything with striping, and with dark coloration.
Mm-hmm.
The second project that I'm working on is the lily whites. I have some of Zengex, Chase's animals here. If you're familiar with crested geckos, he's also another Texas breeder, does phenomenal work. And so I have some of his lily. I have a male lily white with him that I'm working on adding into the exanthic project, and obviously other, lily white, not just outside of exanthic.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third big project that I have going is actually the wild caught line. And that is from Belgium. I actually had imported, we did a kind of like a breeder trade. I exported some hets, some 66% hets, and she was able to export to me some of the wild caught lines that were basically, I think how it went down is one of the original, like, researchers that was a part of, because now from New Caledonia, crested geckos are not able to be exported.
Mm-hmm.
They most of the founding, I guess, all the crested geckos that are here in the U.S. and all around the world are from like 20 wild caught, obviously, New Caledonian geckos. And export's been basically stopped since then. Well, there was a researcher that was had a collection of wild caughts. They were all the original ones were, crested geckos can live 20 plus years, and so they're all older. And she managed to get this individual's collection when he passed away, and she's been breeding them. And I have a couple of their offspring. So I have a female and a male, and I'm working on growing them out. And I'm going to try to basically bring in that wild caught blood. I know Tiki's Geckos also is working with it, and I'm sure a number of other people are. It just may not be super, I guess, publicized. A lot of people probably are keeping on the DL. But yeah, so it's basically new blood that we're trying to work into the animals that we currently have in the population to try to limit the amount of like inbreeding depression that is going on, because there's only so many animals that we get to work with, and it's not like people are purposely inbreeding, but if it comes from 20 animals, it's going to be all originating from those. So potentially like the lily white, the super of the lily white is a fatal combination. So what people are trying to work on is trying to work in like these wild caught lines, and I guess outcrossing to try to make that super lily white. And that's not necessarily my goal. I mean, that's definitely something that could be a potential. I'm sure people will get to it before me. But I just like the idea of being able to broaden the bloodline altogether for, any crested gecko, not necessarily for my benefit or to make the super lily white, but I think that it's something that is important to work with in the crested geckos that are like, a lot of them are just thought about as like, I guess, pet quality or something like that, because they're not like ball pythons. And that's a good thing, that people aren't just trying to like chase the next morph. But I do like the idea of being able to try to extend the bloodlines and see what will happen. It's kind of an interesting project just to see, like they're such cool little animals, and I think there's a lot of potential there. So xanthan, lily white, and the wild caught lines.
That's really awesome. I think you bring up a good point that, you see it with ball pythons, you see it with crested geckos. I think you see it with bearded dragons, but maybe not as much. But it's almost like they don't necessarily get the respect as much as they should, because there's so many people breeding them, which isn't bad, but there's so many people breeding animals that don't necessarily need to be bred to be breeding crested geckos. So it's really nice to talk with people. And I have a few friends who are like, very legitimate breeders who are doing good things with their animals, really bringing in that new blood and new lines to their animals. And it's just cool because it's just totally different from what you normally see the narrative being around crested geckos. Okay, so you have your crested geckos, and first of all, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's kind of like dropping in and out, but like, can you hear me?
Yes, I think there's a little bit of a delay. No worries.
Okay.
I did want to comment that if I seem a bit distracted, the gecko in the top enclosure in the blue has not stopped moving since you turned the lights off.
Oh my goodness.
Cracking me up. I was like, oh, there's a gecko up there. It's the only one I've seen.
All right, that's actually, I don't know. I haven't been posting a lot after my big surgery a couple of years ago. I haven't been posting a lot on Method Noir just because I haven't felt like I had a lot to post. But one of the things that I used to do was Molasses the Molester Mondays. And let me go grab them for you.
Yes, please do.
Can you hear him?
Yeah.
Hold on. He's chirping.
I can hear that. I've never heard a cresty do that.
Yeah. So this is Molasses the molester. Actually, a super awesome actually Patreon person. She's actually was one of the first ones to get one of our enclosures when we first started. She made an awesome, amazing artwork of Molasses because I've tried to breed him and he has never had viable offspring because he always gets distracted by the hand. As you can see, he absolutely loves my hand.
Yeah. Is he trying to mate with your hand?
Yes, he is.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
he's got the tail twitch and everything.
Yeah, so he this is Molasses, so whenever he sees me, he will not stop cruising.
That is so funny. Oh my goodness. What a dumb little creature. I saw a meme one time and it said all crested geckos share the same brain cell. Yours probably isn't having its turn yet. And
I mean, he is the definition of that. Like he's so simple.
Oh yeah, I'll definitely be posting this portion of the video because this is hilarious.
So yeah, he used to have his own time. It was Molasses the Molester Mondays. He feels very strongly about the hand. And he's just a funny little guy. Like he just tries so hard and I just have to laugh.
So what
he doesn't try in the right places, but you know, I guess if you know you're trying hard.
So what morph is he?
I just love how they twitch.
I know. Oh my goodness. So what morph is he?
So he's actually a super stripe. You can tell by a lot of people like to see the 5 stripes.
Can you bring it in the frame a little bit more?
Sorry.
No, you're good.
Yeah, so he's a super stripe. He has the kind of empty back here. He doesn't have the greatest, he's more like a partial super stripe. If you were, a lot of the purists would say probably he's not a good example of it. But you can tell the dorsals here. A lot of the people who like the super stripe like to see all the complete stripes, and there are some phenomenal animals out there. So he's kind of an empty back / super stripe. It depends on who you're talking to. I just wanted to see how his offspring would produce with one of my pinstripe females. But like I said, he hasn't been able to produce any viable offspring.
Poor little guy.
I think he gets too excited about, yeah.
Oh my God.
You know, I've had him for a couple years and it's fine. I love him all the same. He doesn't have to produce. He can just be his weird little self.
That's so adorable.
Yeah, he'll cruise. That's funny. I didn't know if you could see that up there, but he's
been up and down the glass all night.
Yeah, he's super creepy. My mom was just in town and she had to take a picture of his cresticles to send to all of her girlfriends.
I used to have a macro lens for my phone. Okay. And I was taking pictures of my crested gecko. It was another one I had through the rescue that I don't have anymore. But I was taking pictures of the crested gecko and he showed his hemipenes and I got a macro pic of the hemipenes and it wasn't on purpose, but it's the funniest photo I have because it's alarming.
Well, it's crazy. Like they're definitely they got something going on down there.
Yeah, he was very ready for babies.
Yeah. So that's why I was like, oh yeah, Molasses, you know, he's a little horn dog, but no, he just wants the hand. That's okay. He's funny.
We don't judge Molasses.
Yeah, we don't judge.
I've heard of foot fetishes, never a hand fetish, but you know, no judgment.
There's always something. There's space for something new.
Yeah.
as he licks his eyes.
He's like, yeah, that was a good hand.
Yeah, that was good. So yeah, so the crested geckos have actually been a huge part of, you know, the growth in animals and or I guess the projects here. And they really kind of opened my eyes to how awesome that they are, because they have such little personality. So I got them, because I was interested in kind of the genetics and everything, but like learning every little bit about them is really cool. Like my little Xanthic female, she's just a pig. She loves her roaches, and you can kind of tap on the window and she comes up, she's like, "You got roaches?" "Yeah." "Hmm." And then there's the ones that are like, "Nah, I don't really want to be messed with," and they all just have their little personalities.
Mm-hmm. And are all your
But
crested geckos in this room that we're in?
yes, well, yes, yes, all of them are in here. Now some of them are like, okay.
Oh, molasses, no.
He's getting onto the camera here. Some of them are like hatchlings that I have some grow outs, and then I have some that actually I haven't made available yet, just because it's winter, and I really didn't want to do winter holds, especially because it's been so cold this winter. So I'm kind of waiting to list down. Yeah, I've all the crested geckos are going to be in this room. This is kind of my cool room that stays at like mid 70s all the time. So they're on here, but they're kind of, I guess, me getting them open my husband's eyes to like how the community can function beyond just like having pets. So like reptiles to him, we're always like, okay, you like reptiles and they're kind of a pet. But like whenever we got into the breeding of the crested geckos and started going to shows, he was like, wow, this is kind of like something that's really unique, right? So I started going to shows, and he really was he would come and help, and I would be selling crested geckos, and I ended up getting into roaches. So I started having them as feeders for my monitors when they were younger, and he's gonna jump. And then they just became like really cool pets, and I started selling them at shows. And I remember one show I actually sold out of cave roaches. I was selling them for like $6 and $9 a piece for adults, which is actually a pretty damn good deal.
What kind of roaches?
Cave roaches. So they're giant cave roaches. They are. I ended up getting I picked them up at a show for feeders because once they get going, they're fairly prolific, but they take a while to get going. They're one of the biggest roach species. They're not as heavy bodied as like a hisser, but they are the longest, which I was looking for a large roach species to be able to feed to the monitors. As they're hatchlings, they are insectivorous. Is that the right way to say it?
I'm not going to correct you if it's not.
So they would eat insects, and I was like, well, I need something huge. I don't want to just be feeding like 100 dubia roaches, right?
Right.
So I got into the roaches, and I just remember, one show that I didn't have a lot of cresteds, I ended up almost selling out of roaches, but that's a whole nother story. But going back to my husband and I, he really wasn't interested in the animals. He was like, the crested geckos was like, are you really, should we use spending this much on these animals? And I'm like, I really don't know. Like I'm trying to get it to support itself. And we it was 3 or 4 years ago when we got this house, and he was like, is this really the right thing that you should be doing now? And I'm like, I don't know, but I feel like it is. I feel right about this. I feel like, this could take me somewhere. And I didn't know at the time that it would take me here or take us here. So I started going to the shows and getting involved with Herp Show and Sean and Lori, and they were super awesome. And that really opened my eyes also to the community, and how it can be so much more than just breeding and keeping and educating people about reptiles. So the crested geckos kind of brought me back into it big time. And I was like, of course, I'm a big lizard person. So I had to get back into the monitors. So I ended up getting Jax, like I talked about earlier. She was my first large water monitor. And I got her, and then, I had her for probably she was maybe a year, 2 years before I got any of the others. And now I have 4 Asian water monitors.
So what was it about the water monitor that attracted you to them?
I've always liked, iguanas it was really cool. once again, my parents were the enablers. My father built a huge outdoor enclosure for my big male that he found, and then we ended up putting the smaller iguanas in there.
Mm-hmm.
And here in Houston, the outdoor enclosure, it really was neat to see them have their natural behaviors. And one of the things that he built in there was a little pond. And it was always neat to see Lucky, the big iguana, jump from his ledge where he would bask into the water and just like submerge himself in there. And that always fascinated me, was the part of having the aquatic aspect. Yeah, we got a little flying Superman.
If you hear a thump, it's molasses.
Yeah, super molasses. Yeah, he kind of sees himself in the reflection here. There's a tub behind him. But I guess he thinks it's another gecko. He's done with the hand for now.
Tart's got to pair him now.
Yeah. Just so it is raining outside, so it'll probably be good.
If you pair him now and he got babies, you have to name them after me. Just so you know, it's part of the rules of being on the podcast.
Hey, I'm totally. If he makes some viable eggs, like, you got all the names.
Perfect. Orange forehead.
Orange forehead. Yes, that'll be number one, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
So the water monitors were fascinating to me because they're a lot like the iguanas that I grew up with. Now, the monitors definitely have a different kind of intelligence. You can tell it. They're more like birds. And I did have birds as I was growing up, at least smaller ones, not like the big. My parents didn't really want to get into the big parrots, but I had parakeets and cockatiels and smaller birds. And it was just really neat to be able to interact with an animal that would, like, it was definitely an interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And with the monitors, it's almost like interacting like a bird, like the way that they look at you and they think and their eyes dilate. It really, like, sometimes I'm kind of like I hate to use the word passionate, but I'm a passionate person when it comes to these animals. And like, I get teared up when I see them do like really natural behaviors like that, like how they look and they think. And it's sometimes when, like, they'll be climbing and kind of fall off and scurry, and they like look around and like look above, even though they're in an enclosure, they have a roof on them, they're looking for birds and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that stuff just fascinates me. So I love when they show their actual behaviors like that. So the water monitors were always something that fascinated, because when they were large enough that I felt like they were a big lizard, but they weren't a croc monitor. They didn't have like huge teeth. They didn't have the huge jaw strength, and they didn't get quite as big. Now at the time,
and now you have a croc monitor.
I liked that they went to the bathroom in their water.
Mm-hmm.
They were basically kind of potty trainable. As long as you kept it clean, that's what they naturally want to do. So I kind of preferred that. And when I got my first one, I just had to get another one. And then I decided to kind of get into, I guess, a breeding program, or a goal. I don't want to call it a program, but I started out with the Jax, who is my standard. She's just okay. Please don't close the program. He just jumped on the phone. She's a standard macro, like Sumatran Salvatore. And so my goal was to, once again, kind of do the dark morphs. And that's one of the cool things also about the water monitors, is they do have like localities, and they have different kind of traits. So I obviously, once I had my taste of Axanthic with the crested geckos, I wanted to get into the Axanthic water monitors. So my second foray into it was, I had the opportunity to buy Dex at the time. He was a little older than a hatchling. He was being imported by Jesse's Jungle in Florida. At the time, he brought in a number of Black Dragon water monitors from Quality Reptiles in the Netherlands. And I think they're called Kilobet, or I'm not sure how you actually pronounce it, but they've since changed their name to Quality Reptiles. And
so the Black Dragon, that's something I heard you refer to before. Is that a morph, or is that like a line?
So the Black Dragons, you're going to have the Sumatran Black Dragons, and you're going to have, I'm going to probably butcher this, Komini.
Okay.
They are more of a, and there's slight argument of how you find your information on this, but as far as I want to proliferate the information, is it's basically a locality of Black Dragon water monitors. And so your Sumatrans are going to be larger. The Komani are going to be a little bit smaller, and that's what Kilobet for Quality Reptiles says that Dex is, and those whole water monitors. And he is a little bit smaller, which is good. I don't need, like this like 7-footer freaking massive big dude that comes to shows with me. While that is, it is very impressive. It's nice to have, a little bit smaller. He can fit in the back seat of the truck in his his little travel tub, and he's also not a complete nuisance at the show and trying to destroy everything. He did jump on a table and scare a bunch of kids at the last show, but that's that was the look on their faces was great. But Dex he's the locality water monitor. He's a little bit smaller, but he was imported from the Netherlands, and get a little bit of molasses there.
A little molasses action.
And he was a complete butthead. Now everybody sees him and he's so sweet. That's after a lot of work and a lot of tail whips, a lot of huffing and puffing and scratches. Mm-hmm. So when everybody sees like a really cool, like me interacting with Dex, especially, he's my most, I would say, quote, tame or best mannered water monitor. It has taken a lot of work. When I first got him, he was a butthead. He came from the Netherlands, so he had been through a lot of shipping.
Right.
Now they did do a great job importing him. It wasn't like he was a wild caught. He was actually bred in the Netherlands and then imported here to the US. Mm-hmm. But he was a butthead. He really he wasn't socialized. So I spent a lot of time with him, and I was like, okay, so if I can do this with him, it's like, all right, well, maybe, I can pair him and Jax, so that would make het black dragons.
Mm-hmm. So that's okay to like cross locality.
Well, it depends. So localities in like carpet pythons and animals like that are a little bit more, I guess, not important is not the right word, but popular. It's way more popular to have a locality, and way more important for a lot of breeders to have locality rather than like, quote, the designer, like in green trees.
Right.
So with the water monitors, more of the captive born and captive bred is the important part, not necessarily the locality. Mm-hmm. At least in the circles that I've been in. So you've got like the Kamingi water monitor, which is the Philippine yellowhead water monitor, and there's a lot of different types of animals that the people will focus on. But as far as like just the regular macro, it's really, they don't have localities. They've been bred for many generations, especially by Nerd, Vital Exotics, a number of the the Salvatore breeders. So it would basically be a morph project, is what it would come down to, not a locality project.
Okay.
So it would be 100% hets if I were to breed with Jax. But I was like, hey, well, if I really want to get into this, and I've had, my success with Jax and Dex, so maybe I should get into, like the rarer morphs. So I found a Xanthic female, and that's when things started getting a little crazy. She ended up being the one that came to me sick and blind. And I learned very quickly how important it was to find a good vet. I don't know if it froze. It shows that I'm okay. It's back.
No, you're good. You're good.
I hope molasses didn't like jump and like stop something. So I ended up acquiring Ember, which is my Xanthic female. She's been a absolute sweetheart. But she's been an interesting foray into learning different husbandry issues coming to me, as well as the honesty of breeders and other things. Because the Xanthic, I guess, trait in water monitors is mostly a wild caught trait at this point. People really aren't breeding them and producing actual visuals much, or at least as far as I know. Like I said, I'm not huge on the social media, and a lot of people who do work with them are not going to be posting on social media. So I got her, and then I ended up acquiring a double het black dragon and Xanthic. So they're recessives. If hets are being produced, they're not visual. So I ended up getting a double het from Michael Cole at Ballroom Python South. He ended up having, she is a CB, so she's captive born because both of her parents were wild caught, a wild caught Axanthic female and a wild caught male Sumatran black dragon. So she's got some really interesting genes, and I've been growing her up for the last, year and a half, 2 years, and she's getting near breeding age, and things are about to start getting fun. So it's been a couple years in process, and she's really going to be probably the one that is going to be bred as far as, working with Dex and Jax. She's been cycling, but we're really trying to wait for the right time to work with an incubator. I mean, there's so many projects, so work with an incubator and being able to develop that, because she's, like I said, cycling and laying infertile clutches now, and we could see if there's partho in there with parthenogenesis.
I was just going to ask about that.
Yeah, so she's the water monitors. It is something that they do. They fertilize the eggs, and it can be a viable male offspring that comes out. So as long as she's passing the eggs, which is, it definitely deals with having the right enclosure, the right nest box, and her feeling comfortable, she will continue to cycle whether she's paired with a male or not. And I haven't been in a hurry with that. Like I said, I mentioned it a couple years ago. I had a surgery that really kind of like also made me dive deep into the reptiles more than I was at the time. And that's kind of put a lot of the breeding projects on hold. It's just because I wasn't able to walk for a couple months, and I was off work, and it just made me realize, having to go through that process, that there's more to life than just working. And so I was like, okay, let me, kind of reset here with my reptiles and what projects I have. And I said, okay, I'm going to slow down on the breeding. I'm going to grow them all, make sure they're happy. And they're basically, I mean, at this point, they're pets. I do have the breeding plans, but, water monitors, they live a long time. They're all, growing and happy and healthy. And so I'm like, I'm not one of those people that's in a super hurry. I don't feel like the animals have to produce for me. I just enjoy the animals themselves. And I really, that's kind of like, I guess my reward is not necessarily, when I got into this, 3-4 years ago, I was like, okay, I need to breed this and breed that. And this is, I had the success with the crested geckos, and I got that taste of working with animals. And I'm like, I absolutely love this. And I would like to move on from my job at some point at the dealership and work with reptiles. But it has, hindsight 2020, it has become something completely unexpected, how I thought that I was going to be in the reptile industry and reptile community. And now what we are doing is completely like 180 of what I had planned, because best plans.
Of course. So you talked about how Stephen kind of, was following you to shows. He was encouraging you, skeptical a little bit, which I think is very common with people who are with partners that aren't necessarily in the hobby. But transitioning into how you did make this your full-time career, he was really the one who got interested in designing and building the cages initially, correct?
Yes. So you're a very very astute, I guess, not visualizer, what's the word, being able to pick up on that, because a lot of people think that it probably originated with me, but it was actually Stephen. It was kind of this weird kind of one-off thing. It was last, I guess, October, September.
Pre-COVID?
Oh yes, pre-COVID.
Okay.
Not last, so it'd be a year ago, so 2019 September.
Okay. That's how we just define our lives now. It's pre or post COVID.
I swear.
Sorry to anyone who wanted to listen to a podcast and get away with it. You can't. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay,
so pre-COVID, yes, 2019, before the days of the COVID.
Oh my God, the good old days.
Oh man, we're gonna be talking about this one for a long time. So pre-COVID in 2019, the animals are getting to be a really big part of our lives. We're going to the shows. We're really enjoying like being at the shows and interacting with the people. And I wanted to take it farther, and he was kind of looking into it as like, okay, well, my wife's a little crazy. She likes the reptiles, but she's not, like she's doing good things with it. It's not too creepy right now.
Yet.
Yeah, just
famous
wait.
last words.
Exactly.
Not too creepy yet.
Yes, that YET. So 2019 September, he starts getting into watching like YouTube videos, and he watches, because we've kind of delved into like building PCs and stuff, and after the whole surgery thing and not doing the motorsports as much, he wanted to kind of like have a hobby or have something that would like kind of get his mind off of working and not being able to really have any kind of outlet other than work at the time, because we weren't doing a whole lot of like the athletic stuff that we had been doing. And he started looking into the computer case modding and stuff, and then he saw like CNC machines. You could get like a hobby CNC machine that you could kind of like, I guess, once I keep using this term, but like cut your teeth on. And he was like, okay, well, and he watched this actually British guy who did his own case modding, and was just like blown away at how amazing and creative this guy got with PC cases and PC like elements, not necessarily the case, but there was like different parts of a PC. So we saw that, and then I was like, hey, if you want to do stuff with the CNC machine, there's PVC reptile enclosures, and at the time
they're expensive.
And they're really nice, and it's something that I've really wanted. And it's like, well, you could test on, I've got a lot of animals that you could, kind of test on and try to figure it out. So it was weird because it all kind of fell together. I was actually talking with a friend of mine. One of the jobs that I had before I worked at a car dealership and started to be a supervisor there was I actually worked on a landscaping crew for about a year when I was in transition, trying to, get my feet under me after the old relationship and, getting into an apartment and then, getting into the house that we have. So I worked in landscaping, and I was talking with that guy, and we built fences and gazebos and stuff like that. And I was like, hey, I've got a water monitor that's getting pretty big, and I want to move her into the sunroom. I was like, could you build an enclosure for her? And he's like, yeah, like, how would you want to do it? And then we were all thinking of doing this out of wood, like basically framing a house and kind of making a wooden enclosure. And then Steven started looking at the PC stuff, and long story short there, he ended up getting a smaller CNC machine and started working on it, and started working in CAD, and basically started from literally knowing zero about any of this, any kind of computer design, any kind of, what is a sheet of PVC? Like what is that? And started with that. And so we went down to we found a PVC supplier after trying to figure out like who carries PVC, because unfortunately here in Texas, Lowe's and Home Depot don't carry it. So we had to source PVC. We looked online and tried to get it shipped to us, and we ended up getting just a couple sheets, and we paid astronomical amounts for it. And he ended up running the first line. It's in one of our videos on our YouTube channel. The first cut with the CNC was actually for the Greg box, which Greg is one of our croc skinks. He's a very gregarious skink, so his name is Old Greg from the UK kind of like, I guess, skit show, Old Greg. Very funny, very dry, very British. So that's what Old Greg's named after. And so we called this box the GB1, Greg Box 1. And we ended up cutting it with a saw for the actual outer dimensions, but this one little vent was made by the CNC machine. And we were so proud. We made the video, and we were like, oh my God, look at this. This is the most beautiful thing ever. And you look at the video, and like the thing barely fit. It had gaps. I mean, it was like maybe a foot by a half and a foot by half and a foot of an enclosure. And the gaps are like huge. We had them glued together, but we were so proud of it. Like
you made it.
Yeah, exactly. And it had taken probably a week of like him researching and trying to set up the machine and going through, oh my God, so many trials and tribulations of iterations of failures and like not cutting all the way through and not getting it to talk to the computer. So it's, I mean, there's so many programs. So he tried to figure that out, and we ended up making this Greg Box one, and we loved it. And then we had that taste of it, and we looked at each other, and he was like, "This is actually really fun." So he kept working on it, and between me and giving him the input for what the animals need, like what kind of screens, like how much depth, because I had a UVB meter and I wanted to say, we could offer enclosures with UVB. They could be bioactive. And he's like, well, how are we going to do that? What size do we need? And so we went through all this like huge back and forth process. And then that is what drew him into reptiles, is like trying to develop these boxes that were just beyond boxes. They offered, UVB and more of like a habitat. So Focus Cubed was never an idea at this point. We were just trying to make enclosures for my animals, and I wanted them to be as nice as they could be. I wanted them to have, the heat gradient for the crested geckos. I wanted the bearded dragons enclosures to be secure. So we just went through a whole like R&D process with all of my collection at that point. And it was a very valuable but very, very trying process for like a husband and wife, because like he didn't really have the whole CAD design down.
Right. And that's not easy. CAD design is not easy. I used to work for a company, and I was the only person on the team who didn't actually know how to use the software that we built. And I was in marketing, so I was the tester, and it's hard. It's not easy at all. So like I would be given instructions on how to do something, and I was essentially, they were like, if you can do it, anyone can. And I very often could not do it. So props to Steven for figuring it out.
So how did you get around that? I guess you just put in a lot of like hard work and grit to figure it out.
Yeah, so I worked for my background is in technology. I got my information systems degree this last year, and I was working for a technical marketing team. So I'm in marketing now, and this team was very much focused on how technology and marketing overlap. So we built all of these like essentially like tests for the software that we sold to explain it to other people to use. And I picked it up fairly quickly when I needed to, but for the first month or so that I was there, it was very much like, you don't have any background in this, so it's baptism by fire. So I wish I'd kept working with it, because it's really cool. It's a very cool skill to have, but it was not my forte.
Man, first off, congratulations. I saw that you did graduate, and that's a huge
thank you.
That's a huge accomplishment.
Thank you. So I started a podcast. Kind of like yeah, I was like, okay, I graduated. I had all this free time, and Joe was like, all right, start a podcast.
That's a good outlet and a good way to get something started. It's kind of, I think that's how everything started. Like you have something and it turns into something else, and then it grows, and then you're just like, it's something, this huge baby that you're proud of. But it's always funny when you first start it, because you're like, oh, this is just something that's like small and it just kind of like popped up, kind of thing.
Yeah, like the Facebook group is how this started. I know you're a member of the women's Facebook group, and
yeah,
I was like so excited when we got 100 members, and now we're sitting at nearly 2,000. I'm like, holy shit! Like, whoa, fuck.
Yeah, and I think that's the story of life, and I think that's like kind of how it's surprising, but you just kind of got to roll with it and smile. Like that's where my like kind of, I guess, wild side comes from. It's like that unexpected is just the most fun, right? Like in the time when it's unexpected is not necessarily good. You're like trying to figure it out, but then when you're like, oh shit, we did it,
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's basically how Focus Cubed was formed, is we were like, oh shit, like we did it. Like we worked as a team, and we argued a lot, and we had a lot of problems, and we had a lot of like frustrations, but it turned into something that we were super proud of. And we were like, well, if we enjoy this, and this is something that like our animals are benefiting from, it's like, well, what if could we do this for other people?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, yeah, if we're willing, I told him, if you're willing to continue with this, it's like, I'm definitely willing to continue with this, because I would
Mm-hmm.
love to expand this into something that like benefits, once again, going back to the community. I'm like, if our animals are doing well and we're able to continue doing this, like, let's keep doing it. So we continue to try to develop like better and better and higher quality enclosures that fit better, were easier to assemble. And it's like all the little things came with time. But
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning, we were just trying to make enclosures that were perfect for the animal, right? And then we started working, especially Steven, he's the design guy. So I have to, give him a huge credit on like the aesthetics, because he brought it more into something, instead of like, oh, you have a reptile room and you have some animals in boxes. No, he wanted to bring it into like, well, people like colors, some people, or
Mm-hmm.
some people like, certain like aesthetic parts of it, and like they want to have it like match their home. So it's like he's the one that really brought that into it. And I said, okay, well, we can do it in different parts of our home. We can like test with the colors and stuff and see what, goes with where. And a lot of times rooms are created at ambience.
Mm-hmm.
So we ended up putting some enclosures outside in our regular house that weren't like an ambient room. And we, worked with gradients and stuff like that. So a lot of these enclosures went through their trial by fire within our own home and our own animals.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were able to, once again, going back to the govies, try to figure out like the perfect temperature gradients and what, products worked well and stuff, and how you could like integrate UVB in places that weren't necessarily normally given UVB, like
Mm-hmm.
shallow things. We've been working with a certain type of lighting there. So that's also another thing that we're kind of working on. It's been in, the works for over a year. So then we're doing this for like, ouch, thank you for biting me, like a month, not a month, into 2020. And so boom, 2020 hits. We go to our first show that we debuted, the Focus Cubed Habitats, which I have the video on our YouTube channel. It's a
I remember
Repticon
this.
in February. And so that's like right before the like COVID shutdown happened. And I think that like that literally was like the weekend before like everybody was starting to like venues were closing down. So we were like, okay, the Repticon's still on, we're gonna go. And we, Stephen always on in his podcast when he was talking about, he's like, we just brought these enclosures there. We had our boa constrictor Xyla's enclosure there with her in it, and people are like trying to open it and look at it. We're like, no, there's a snake in there. She's really sweet, but like there's a snake in there, just letting you know. So we brought her enclosure, which was the first splatter paint enclosure that he ever did,
Mm-hmm.
which that was super awesome too. I remember doing that in our front yard when my mom was here, and we had her do like the first splatter, and she was like, oh my God, this is really fun. So it was a family ordeal. But we showed up with these enclosures, and people had a huge, I guess their reception was awesome. They were like, wow, these are very different. Like they kind of have a different, and a lot of things where people had said is that they look like computer cases, which is really funny.
As soon as you said that that's how he got into it, I was like, yes, like it's PCs. Oh yeah. I didn't even think about it. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's funny because some of the times I'll look at them and I'm like, the design definitely has like the like modded PC kind of look to it. And that's not necessarily like his goal, but it's like sometimes his, I guess, psyche goes back to that first days of
it's familiar.
So I think it's really cool, because that's actually a huge community. It's a PC case that actually transfers over to reptiles a lot, is like PC gamers and PC modders actually keep a lot of reptiles and amphibians. So it's been neat to see, like, people are like, wow, that looks cool, it'll match my PC case. So we've actually done a couple builds like that. So it's really cool just to see the passions of people's like communities meld together, because reptiles can be part of, going back to how I was rambling earlier about like mainstream and educating, is people, reptiles can be a part of, it doesn't have to be so niche, it can be something that's more mainstream, that people need to have more knowledge and community for. So Repticon February. It was super awesome. We really didn't sell a whole lot, but we talked to a lot of people that were very moved by what we had to offer. They were very praising of it, and they were like, man, this is, not something I ever expected. And they're like, do you have a business card? And then we got a ton of contacts after the show of people asking, could we do a custom build here, custom build there? And that's when, after that show is actually when we decided to buy our second CNC machine. And then COVID hit. And as everybody knows, everything was kind of shut down and delayed. My husband, basically, he was a finance manager at a motorcycle dealership, and he was told not to come to work at first. And then they were like, well, we're going to be open. And then they were open, and they weren't supposed to be open. And he ended up working more hours and not getting paid for it. And he's like, I'm not, at this point, he wasn't sure like what COVID was. We weren't sure. So
yeah, no one knew.
Yeah, am I going to get sick? Like I'm forced to be working here, and I'm not getting paid for it because we're supposed to be shut down. So that was a whole kind of like political thing with that. And he was just like, well, if I'm not going to be paid for the work that I have to do, he's like, we had a ton of orders at that time. We thought it was a ton of orders from the Repticon show, and like people just, being introduced to us and wanting to get some custom builds. And he was like, we were both working, and we were staying up until like 1-2 a.m. trying to get the CNC machine to cut everything. And we were going through a lot of trial and error. We were making sure the quality was there. And then COVID hit, and we couldn't get like products. We couldn't get hinges. We couldn't get, PVC sheets. And then the second CNC machine that we ordered ended up being delayed by 2 months. And we already had to wait a couple months for it. So like everything just kept piling up, and we were like, and he's like, if I'm not going to get paid at work, I'm going to go ahead and, I'm going to take the leap. I enjoy doing these enclosures so much, and this is something that I feel really fulfilled about. Whereas work, it was kind of like he was just working for the man and didn't feel fulfilled. He was getting beat down by the customers that were like, it's too busy here. You guys are open like 2 hours a week. And it was not a good situation. So
right.
I said, I'll support you no matter what. I don't care if this is a reptile thing or not. I will support you in whatever you want to do. So I was still working. We were still working full time at my dealership. I worked at a car dealership. And so he took the leap. He said, I've worked here for 6 years. I appreciate, everything that I've been through with you guys. And, we made a lot of friends through his work, but he was like, I have to move on. They were like, no, really? And they were always joking with him that he was making roach enclosures, because he had roaches on his desk in a little enclosure in his office at his job. And that was
I need to move somewhere that lets me have herps. I need to move. It seems like my friends in Texas, like Chris Paint Job has office geckos. And I'm like, where the hell do you work in Texas? Like, what is it about that place? Yeah. Jeez, I want to move there.
Hey, you're welcome to come to Texas. It's a great place to keep reptiles, that's for sure. And we have decent weather most of the time. It does get very hot, though.
Yeah, I can deal with the hot.
Yeah, it's probably better. I don't know. I don't think I could do the snow thing that everybody up north does. It's too cold most of the year.
Okay, so Steven has these office roaches.
Yeah, he has the office roaches, and so everybody was like, they thought that he was, just like I was crazy, and he was making enclosures for my animals, and I was sucking him into the, the whole reptile thing, and they're like, oh, you're gonna make roach enclosures? Because that's what he had at work. And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna make roach enclosures. That's what I'm doing. And they were like, no, you're really quitting? And he's like, yeah, I have to do this. This isn't working. So the whole COVID thing came, and that, he wasn't getting paid at work. So he said, all right, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it for myself. I'm going to be proud of it. And the enclosures were something that he was actually very proud of, and he was learning. And he kind of had his passion back for something again. And so he took the leap. And I still am very proud of him for what the stress and the mulling over the chewing of the cud that he went through, trying to figure out if he was actually going to do that. and if he had the wits to do it. Because one of the things about being your own boss is, while you get to be your own boss, nobody's there to save you. So that was the thing, is like, I have to do this for real and figure it out. So, congrats to him. He was the first one to take the leap, and he took it and ran with it. Like, we still continued working until midnight. I still continued to stay at my job. We went through the COVID shutdowns and made it through that, and our family made it through that fairly unscathed. And fast forward to December of 2020, I was taking care of all the animals here. We were working, into the night, every night, trying to keep up with the orders after, multiple shows, and developing our internet presence. And everything was just piling up. And I don't know if he would ever admit to it, but me being me, and I'll talk about anything, like the anxiety, I didn't sleep. I'd wake up in the middle of the night crying, and I would have nightmares about that we would build enclosures and they just like explode. It was, these silly things that your I guess subconscious thinks about. I'm like, I just couldn't sleep. He couldn't sleep. We started, it was just not good. It started to stress, like our family situation. His family was worrying about it. My family was like, what are you doing with this? The typical thing of people who kind of jump into the reptile industry as their sole means of income, is like their family. It's like, what are you doing? Like, my family's always been supportive, but my husband's family, they're not reptile people at all.
Yeah. And it's hard to explain.
I think that it's, fortunately and unfortunately, I think that a lot of people listening, and you and I both know, is like, the family's not necessarily accepting of it. Like, if it's a hobby, okay, like, oh, that's just something that they do. But if you decide to do it as a full-time job, they're like, why are you doing this? Is this the right thing to do with your life? Do you want to, is this going to be something that you see yourself doing in 10 years, kind of thing? And it's like, reptiles? Are you sure? And I think that, like, him being so steadfast in his decision, and telling his family, like, having never been a reptile person, and them being not reptile people, it's like, yeah, I believe in this, and I believe in myself, and I believe in my wife. And that's really what made me take the leap. Is this sounds so, like, lovey-dovey and emotional, but it really, that's what it came down to. Is Focus Cubed is not just a business for us, it is our way of life, and it's what it's become, is our way of life. So much more than we ever thought it would be. In the community, and like doing these podcasts, and people like you that support the community and help spread like the education and stuff, that's what we're thankful for. And that's why I believe that we need to come together more than, like, so much lately it's been everybody's, been at each other's throats. And from all my rambling and I guess weirdness, is I just want people to believe that reptiles can bring people together. They can make your life something that is worth working for, worth living, and worth, being a part of a community that isn't as small as you think, but is small enough to be close. It's the kind of thing. It's like, it's not so spread apart that it's not so small that nobody can be a part of it and not like make a living, or not be passionate. And it's like, there's so many YouTubers that are not just pet tubers, but people who are just education based, that revolve around reptiles, and people who make their living. And then, like, there's, in the last year, there's been a bloom of podcasts, which is awesome, because the more that's out there and the more outreach that everyone has, the more this hobby can grow, and the more people can be like my husband and I and take that leap. Maybe not under some stressful times like we had, but like, that's just, I guess that's the trials of life. And that's why I think it's really that's why we're so proud of it, is we went through that, and we had the jobs, and we took the leap after, the hours of work, and we still continue to work 7 days a week, 10 to 14 hour days. And it's not looking like it's going to let up. And that's both a good thing for the fact that the reptile industry is growing.
Mm-hmm.
And another good thing that people believe in quality care for their animals, because the first step it takes is to think outside of your wheelhouse. And that's what we really, I guess that's the message that I, at the end of all this, is want to give to people, is like, there's more to it than just being a weird reptile nerd. I think that people can take it as far as they would like to go, you know?
Yeah.
And really enjoy.
Yeah, I think
really enjoy it.
I can't think of a better place to kind of wrap things up, because we have been talking for 2.5 hours, which I could talk to you for 6 hours, but I just want to ask like a couple more questions and then we'll wrap things up. So if someone is interested in getting a focus cube habitat, what is the process like, and what is like, how does, from start to finish, tell me what goes into getting one of your enclosures?
So hold on, my computer just muted. Oh, technical.
I can hear you. You're good.
Okay. So with one of the things that we try to be great at is customer service, and not necessarily customer service in like a sense of like, hey, you're the customer and we're like providing a service. We want to talk with you like on a personal level and try to get what's best for your animal. Now there's only 2 of us, so there's only so much we can do. So we have tried to develop a website that both explains how and what accessories are, and what enclosure sizes are, and animals that are good for them. And if the information can't be found on the website, we leave ourselves very open to be emailed, contacted on Facebook, Instagram, really anything. We try to be available within a couple hours. Now, if it's something that's emailed over the weekend or something like that, or we tend to be like old people, and we get up really early and we go to bed sort of not late. So if you message us at like 9 p.m., we're probably going to be winding down for the day and not replying to messages. But during the workday, we try to be as accessible as possible to try to help people get an enclosure that they want. And now we started out with 2 different, the high rise and the sector, 2 different models, and now we have a handful of models and keep adding more each, I guess, really at this point, each week is where.
And you guys are very open to custom sizes as well, right?
Yes, we're open to custom sizes. Now, we do have to have the caveat that custom sizes do take longer. We have no issue working with you on a custom size. We would love to do it, but a lot of times people want that at the same time that our original already designed models are, and it just, being 2 people, we're trying to remedy that and trying to get, trying to work through that backflow, but because, of COVID and everything, we just can't do them as fast. But yes, we're totally open to custom sizes and custom builds. We have people messaging us and wanting to work on paludariums, stuff for like amphibians and dart frogs, and of course, like with our exoteratops, working with the exoterra enclosures. So we try to be very open. If you can't find something on our website, simple thing is to contact us on your mode of preference, Facebook, Instagram, email, whatever works for you. We try to be there.
Awesome. And then my last question for you, very briefly, tell me about this new croc monitor. We can't gloss over that.
I didn't know like how to bring him or her into it, and I already ramble enough. But
I was waiting. I was like, we're going to talk about it even if she doesn't want to.
Yes, you're awesome. I even if this isn't included in the podcast, I'm so excited to talk about it. So one of the crazy things that came out of the Texas, energy weather crisis is a while back I had purchased a croc monitor from Blake Wilson Reptiles, which is a local, breeder and reptile keeper here in around the Houston area. And at the last show, and even before that, Steven was talking about, he's like, man, it would be really cool to have croc monitor. He's like, you have the water monitors, and it's like, how cool would it be to have a croc monitor? And I'm like, yeah. I mean, I've always
say no to that.
Yeah. I've never really jumped into them because while I'm used to the Salvators, the croc monitors do get physically longer. They're one of the longest lizards in the world, and it's like, well, you need to be able to house that. but he expressed that interest in them after me having the Salvatores for so long and absolutely loving working with them, like absolute passion project right there. I was like, okay, yeah, if you want a croc monitor, he's like, no, we really shouldn't do it. And then he'd like, anytime he'd see a croc monitor, like on one of the reptile videos we were watching, he's like, we need a croc monitor. And I'm like, done. So I kind of kept it on the DL. So he was like, yeah, it'd be really cool if we could do it. I don't know how we do it, but we need a good one. We need to, like work on the enclosure and like how to care for a croc monitor as it was like from a young, because he's like, I wanted to get it like a hatchling. And I was like, okay. So that like kind of narrowed down what I wanted to work with. So Blake had some hatchlings, some juveniles at the last show, and he was kind of like, he had one there, and Steven was so close to getting it, but he's like, no, okay. It's like, we'll think about it a little bit more. So I contacted Blake and I'm like, hey, bud, you have some awesome croc monitors. Can we buy the one that you had at the show? He's like, well, that one's already, taken up. So he says, I have one more left. I think it's a she. No idea, honestly. He was like, I'd just call her that, because the croc monitors, when the juveniles, it's even harder to tell, like, their sex from, I mean, it's really hard to tell physically. So, and he's like, she's super high yellow. And I'm like, all right, cool. As long as you got her, like, you're good. Let me go ahead and pay for her. And, I'll pick her up. I was like, only thing is my husband's birthday is in June. Do you think you could hold her for that long? Because we've got an insane queue of enclosures right now, and we need some time to develop an enclosure, and I need to kind of like break it to him that that's going to be his birthday gift.
So and when was this that you were purchasing it?
What?
When was it that you were purchasing it?
Probably about a month ago.
Okay. So you were thinking like,
what is it now? February, so January, February, okay. Early February.
Gotcha.
With everything happening, it's crazy. So
I know.
And I know caveat, I know a lot of people say that it's not good to buy an animal for somebody for a gift. I absolutely agree with that. But because he's expressed so much interest in it, it's kind of, I got him the boa constrictor that we have, and it's kind of a collective thing. I say that it's for him, but like we take care of it. It's part of our lives now, and it's part of, how we grow as a couple, right?
Right, absolutely.
So I'm like, all right, he's probably going to be mad, but he's really not going to be mad because he wanted to do it anyway. So I said, okay, got to hold it until June. And it's okay, that's fine, as long as, pay me up front, everything. And then boom, this total winter disaster hit here in Texas. And Blake had a lot on his hands. He actually had a monitor building that, once again, because we don't have a lot of like coldness here, it wasn't super insulated. So the whole monitor building was not keeping temperature, and he had like lots of adult monitors, lots of hatchlings. And he messaged me, says, hey, your monitor, is safe. We've got it in the house. He's warm. And I said, okay, I'm going to go ahead because this is like a crazy situation. I felt super horrible for him. It's one of those things that I think a lot of people need more empathy in the hobby is or at least what happened in this situation is like, you've got a lot going on. I appreciate you reaching out to me for the animal that I purchased and trying to make me feel like the animal's okay and that the animal is okay. But I said, once the roads are passed, like do you mind if we come and, take him off your hands? Basically one less mouth to feed and warm. Because I didn't know how long this was going to last.
Right. And it's a lot to ask of someone else to
exactly
care for,
that's what I said. I was like, one of the things is that he had to hold it so we could build an enclosure. So with everything out of whack, I told Steven about it. I said, hey, because he was once again talking about a croc monitor. I was like, I bought a croc monitor from Blake. I know you wanted one. The only thing is we need to make an enclosure like now because we have to go get him. And he's like, what, are you serious? And I'm like, yes, I'm serious. And he's like, oh my god. And then he was like, and I looked at him, I'm like, you didn't really think that the first time that you said, I want a croc monitor, that I wasn't going to get a croc monitor.
Right.
Because I was like, I've always wanted to expand the monitors, or at least the monitor project, just because they're so much fun to work with. And being able to work with such an intelligent species, I was super stoked to be able to do it, especially with something that he's passionate about. So, everything went down with the Texas weather. We ended up cobbling together, and I say cobbled together, it was some pieces that we had left over from another build that was a 6 foot tall, 4 foot wide build. and it was actually for a 2-foot deep, but he ended up designing and working out of some scrap that we had. He made it 3 feet deep, and we managed to put it together. He made these lizard ladders. It was gorgeous.
It looks like you've been planning it for months.
Well, he designed it, and I looked at it because we had power. That was the first day that we had power. The roads were still thawing, and he was like, all right, I'm going to design it. I'm like, okay, I will go work on enclosures. I will go, do whatever. Because we were worried about blackouts and rolling blackouts, and we didn't want to run the CNC machine because once it died, like, one, it would be pulling a lot of power. Two, once it died, an entire sheet would be wasted.
Right.
So we were trying to work with stuff that we already had cut. So I was like, all right, you design, I'll go assemble stuff and do other stuff for the business. So he came and brought me in there, and I was, once again, like I said earlier, I kind of teared up because I got emotional. I was like, oh my God, that is the most awesome design like ever. It had the little ladders. He's like talking about how the croc could climb up it. I'm like, oh my God, from 3 or 4 years ago, having no interest in reptiles, and now like seeing his eyes light up with trying to build this enclosure for this animal that like he's wanted and I've wanted, and I'm like, that is what this whole endeavor is about. Is helping the community and supporting each other and growing as us, like him and I as a husband and wife team. We really try to push that because like we really are a team. So yes, the croc monitor, we did go pick them up, put them in the enclosure. We're still getting, actually, since that was about a week ago when this podcast is being recorded, we are still trying to decorate the enclosure. Everything's kind of delayed with all the shipping and stuff, but we have some like cool little like knickknacks to put in there and for climbing and everything. But yeah, the little croc, monitor's name is Dart because it's very busy, very smart. And so we're working on socialization, and we'll definitely have more video footage of that. But yeah, just seeing his eyes light up and the passion and like really thinking about his own animal in building an enclosure, I can't ask for anything better.
Well, it's been so much fun talking with you. You mentioned how much you appreciate the community, and I think I speak for the community when we say how much we appreciate you. You've done phenomenal things in just the year and a half that you've been doing this to advance husbandry and advance, where we can go with our enclosures and how we can care for our animals. So thank you so much. And thank you for being such a strong supporter of me. Your kind words mean the world. So if people want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Definitely Focus Cubed Habitats on Instagram, Facebook, focuscubedhabitats.com. We try to keep it real simple. That is cubed spelled out, not the cubed is the 3. So that's where you can find it. If you're looking for more of the breeding aspect, it would be Method Noir Exotics LLC on Instagram and Facebook. I don't have a website, but I do have a Patreon, and that is under Method Noir Exotics LLC and Focus Cubed Habitats. And it's not something that we push super hard. We do have some benefits and some really awesome supporters there. And once again, I know I ramble, but we really do find that the community support is one of the most important things. And if we don't support each other, then what's the point? I really do appreciate you having me on this podcast. I apologize for how much editing you'll probably have to do. Because I'm going to keep
most of it. Honestly, I don't even care. Sorry to people who just listen to 3 hours of podcasting, but like, I couldn't even, I had no desire to stop you. Because like I said, we could literally talk for like 6 hours. I think we got through 2 of the things on my sheet, which is fine.
God, I'm so sorry. I really
don't apologize. I'm supposed to
be
in charge. I would be such a bad teacher. I would just be on tangents always. No, it was an absolute pleasure to speak with you. I will make sure to tag all of your pages in the comments. And I want to give another huge thank you to Joe Phelan with Port City Pet for supporting this podcast, and encourage everyone to give us a follow on Instagram, which is the Modern Medusa Podcast, or you can follow me, Dominique, at DeFalco Reptiles on Facebook and Instagram. So thanks everyone for listening, and thanks again, Ashley, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on, and Joe for hosting all this. You both of you are just phenomenal people, and you're very important to the hobby and very, very wonderful people.
Thank you so much. And we'll talk at you next week. Thanks, guys.
All right.